Right. Okay. Get some music on. And then. Okay. Oh, helps if my webcam's open. Hi there, Vast. Hope you're okay. And thank you very much for the Royal Roads recommendation. I have officially put what I've done so far, or the majority of what I've done so far, onto it. Uh, duh, duh, duh. Yeah, so I've got my profile there. I've never seen it before. There's quite a lot on there to check out as well, so I'll definitely be doing that. One thing I did notice. Oh, super low mic. Thank you. Du-du-du-du-du. Let me just sort this out. You might hear double here because I need to test it on my phone to see what the levels are like. Okay, I'll increase the level a bit. Oh god, it was ringing a bit there as well. Hope that's a bit better. It might just be me being a bit quieter today. I'll speak up a bit. So one thing I did notice as well when you recommended Royal Road, so I went on and I uploaded my stuff, and I noticed from chapter 3 onwards, we discussed this before the other night anyway, but I've made a lot of stupid mistakes, which I've corrected the majority of them. But what I want to do is I want to audibly hear what's going on because I find it easier to hear it spoken out loud. And I just want to make sure I haven't missed any stupid mistakes before I continue. So, if I just do the read aloud for now.
Drax watched Harlow frantically chant, with his panicked hands struggling to delicately rest upon the old man's forehead. The boy had sat in silence since the two strangers had carried his unconscious friend through the door, and he now did his best to act invisible, partly to not draw attention to himself, but also not to cause any distractions whilst his other friend did his best to revive Arkham. He'd seen them both use magic several times over the past month, creating campfires with one language, healing his sore and blistered feet with another. It looked difficult, even painful. Each time he tried his best to stay motionless, sometimes even holding his breath. This time was no different. The two strangers had not paid him any attention yet. They both seemed worried and held each other as Harlow continued to whisper in a soothing rhythm. The woman had a bloody nose and a cut above one of her eyes. The man was breathing heavy and was bleeding from his arm. As he looked at his wound, he thought about tearing up the sheets beside him to make bandages. That might be helpful, right? Arkham swallowed air back into his lungs as his eyes snapped back open, and as he sat upright and began to breath heavily, Drax allowed himself to breathe once again. Harlow fell back against the wall behind him and wiped his blonde hair from his face.
Right, okay. Began to breathe heavily. Drax allowed himself to that might do for now.
Yet, they both seemed worried and held each other as Harlow continued to whisper in a soothing rhythm. The woman had a bloody nose and a cut above one of her eyes. The man was breathing heavy and was bleeding from his arm. As he looked at his wound, he thought about tearing up the sheets beside him to make bandages. That might be helpful, right?
It's not clear who he is as the boy looked at the stranger's wound. Okay.
Arkham swallowed air back into his lungs as his eyes snapped back open, and as he sat upright and began to breathe heavily, Drax allowed himself to fill his own lungs once again. Harlow fell back against the wall behind him and wiped his blonde hair from his face. "Oh, thank you," he exclaimed to himself, slightly laughing through his exhausted empty lungs.
Keep bringing up
As the old man slowly found himself back on his feet, with the help of the strangers, Harlow reached over to the young boy and patted him on the shoulder. Don't be scared, Drax, Arkham's okay. Drax nodded as calmly as possible, trying not to let his anxiety show. You just sit tight, I'm going to help our new friends now whilst Arkham sorts himself out, okay? The young lad gripped a hold of the sheet beside him and whispered to Harlow. The man's bleeding. Does he need bandages? The kind giant smiled at Drax and patted him gently.
See, this is the sort of silly stuff that I've missed. He exclaimed to himself, slightly laughing through his exhaustion. Okay. My computer's gone very slow today.
The kind giant smiled at Drax and patted him gently on the head. I'll stop the bleeding this time, mate. But thank you though. I'll let you know if I need you to do that next time someone's hurt. Harlow gave a final smile as he turned to assist Arkham onto the chair beside Drax, and then moved over to the couple on the other side of the room. The elderly mage bent and stretched his back uncomfortably on the chair a few times, before looking over to Drax and sensing his concern. The boy watched him force a smile and a gentle chuckle as he grabbed Drax by the shoulder. Do not worry about me, young Drax. Our Harlow has patched me up very well. Don't tell him this, but I think he is better at some magic than even I am, yes. Drax gave back a small chuckle as Arkham jested, and then looked over to the strangers, who already appeared to be healing with Harlow's assistance. Oh. Are they the one?
Chuckle twice. I can get away with Drax giggling instead of chuckling. He is a younger kid. So, small giggle. And I'll emphasize the I with italics.
That's right, my boy. But they are also here to help us, you see. Arkham looked over to the man and continued, that's the man I was telling you about, Theniel. But we're lucky enough to have his wife with us also, Violet. I told him about his brother, and about Sheltanen. But he is going to want to talk to you, Drax. Just some questions, like I had. I don't know anything more than what I told you, Arkham, I promise. I know, my boy, I know. But what did I tell you when we got here? Drax nodded understandably and chuckled again as he tried to recite Arkham's previous ramblings. Asking the same question, a different way, can lead to a better answer, or so they say. Arkham clapped his hands together in amusement and leant forward with an enthusiastic smile. They should definitely say that, if they don't already. The old man looked up to see that the others had now slowly moved over to them, fresh-faced and with pleasant and calm demeanors. Okay, Drax, Harlow is going to stay with you while I try and get some sensation back in my legs. I have already had a cup of tea with this young couple, and they are marvelous company. I know you have been dying to know more about the city's fences also. I'm sure that young Theniel here will oblige. Arkham gave one final nod to the others as he stood up and hobbled out of the room. Harlow sat beside Drax and gave him a playful shove as the couple sat opposite. Told you the old man was fine. Harlow exclaimed. Hello Drax, my name is Violet, and this is Theniel. The kind lady smiled. Vibrant red hair curled upon her shoulders, her lightly tanned skin now showed no signs of any cuts or bruises. However, the woman's leather tunic, trousers, and boots were still spotted and dashed with blood and mud. The man's garb was just as pitted, with a hole in his jacket's shoulder where his wound once was. His skin was similarly tanned, and his lightly stubbled jawline hid under a mess of long brown hair. We must look a bit of a mess. Violet laughed. We went through a bit of a slog to come and meet you tonight. I hope you're both feeling better. I was going to make some bandages for you, sir. but I wasn't sure if I would get in the way whilst Harlow was. The man shook his head with reassurance. That was awfully nice of you to consider, but trust me, my wife has caused me much worse injuries when we have sparred together in the past. The couple both laughed in unison as Violet playfully hit Theniel in the shoulder, the sight of which made Drax and Harlow join in with amusement. Theniel and Violet want to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. Harlow asked. Although he felt comfortable around Harlow and the couple, Drax couldn't shake the feeling that he was in trouble, just like last time when Arkham found him. Violet leant over to the table beside her, just within reach, and grabbed her foil whip to show Drax. We were talking to Mr. Harlow earlier, and he told us how much you have been reading about these on your journey. Drax looked in wonder at the beautifully intricate Valetian foil whip before him and began to piece together the parts he had only read about in Arkham's books. The guard was beautifully detailed, with what looked like inlays of silver. The grip was made from an incredibly pale leather, which had been wrapped tightly in a corkscrew fashion. The pommel appeared to be solid silver, and also looked to be wrapped around a dark green gem. The débelé was longer than most other fencing swords, and almost looked like the thin rods he would see whipper fishermen using back on the rivers of High Rise. How about if we ask you some questions tonight, and then tomorrow me and Theniel can show you some of the things these foils can do? Drax nodded enthusiastically as Harlow patted him on the back.
Okay. So, most of that's okay. The pommel. The pommel matched the inlays of silver, and also looked to be wrapped around a dark green gem. The débelé was longer than most other fencing swords, and almost looked like the thin rods you would see whipper fishermen using back on the rivers of High Rise. Okay. That seems okay so far.
From Olvi Olviat it took him just over 3 days' journey south to arrive at the neighboring town of Soldeni. After a night's rest, he then continued south for a further 5 days to make it home. The fine spray of the ocean hung within the coastal air, welcoming Sanders, and allowing his lungs to be cleansed of the smoke and dust of city life.
Don't need to mention south again. Continued on for a further 5 days.
He was hoping to make it past the coastal gates of Copulus before the Leviathan tide was forecast. However, the heavy rain led to arriving half a day later than anticipated. The guards did not provide a friendly welcome. He didn't expect one. A stern raised hand as he approached the gate, and the instruction of midday tomorrow was as much as he got from either of them. He carried his belongings along the cliffside and chose to set up camp to watch the demons swim by. He polished his boots, gauntlets, and mask. He sharpened his Kusara picks and daggers and waited for the distinct sound of the coming tide. It was just before nightfall when it came. He held his mask over his face to improve his vision, and watched as the Ratlas Leviathan began to snake above and below the ocean surface. The first sound was that of the serpent itself, almost like whale song in varying degrees of volume, as the beast's head slithered above the tides only to be muffled once again as it dipped into the depths. The second sound was much less noticeable and could almost be mistaken as the snake hissing. It was in fact the sound of the creature excreting boiling acids into the cold sea, causing the toxins to sizzle as they cooled. This reaction caused thick steams to follow in the wake of the Leviathan and a smell of sulfur to blow in from the coastal gales. Those visiting from the mainland had been known to gag as it hit their nostrils. Those of the coast found it barely noticeable after a time, like manure to a farmer. It took the best part of an hour for the serpent's head to push on from Sanders' view, and another 5 for the entirety of the body to slither by. The swells and surf would last the night and lulled him into a comfortable slumber. By the time he woke, hunted, and packed up, it was time for him to pass the gate and make his way down the cliff steps. They were always steep, but the added wash of slime from the Leviathan tide meant that he would have to take his time, despite how impatient he was to get into the Nave undercoves. A long walk down to the ocean and a slight travel back upwards, and into the cliffside, led him to the end of his journey. Copulus stood in the dark of the undercoves. The twisted and coal-black towers climbed towards the cave roof above.
Yeah, they're going to be absolutely massive. There's only one Ratless Leviathan in the Green Sea currently, but it needs to be big enough to prevent people from sailing across the sea to the continent, to the other continents. They are completely isolated, so at a slow movement, the Ratless can move from one side of the continent, from like the north of the continent to the south, in just under a day. But it's very sensitive to disturbances in the ocean, to the point that if it senses anything on the opposite side of the continent causing ripples in the water, for example, it can speed up drastically and prevent them from doing what they aim to do, which is escape the continent and explore further, basically. And this is why the Ratless Hunters are important, which are going to be in the next chapter, because they're there to stop the normal Ratless, the children, almost making their way into the sea and becoming a Leviathan. They're there to cull the Ratless, basically. Okay, so that's okay so far.
The tide often struggled to reach all the way into the caves, however it would leave the blackest of rocks glimmering within the darkness. Copulus echoed with a choir from the sea, splashing waves and the dripping of moisture from above. You return to us, Sanders. The voice bounced through the chamber around him. The news of your good work arrived home before you, trusted disciple. Sanders removed his hood and knelt before the woman, who stood admiring the immense tapestry which lined the wall before her. Yes, it was done, the executioner responded, however I have some concerns. I do not, she smiled, beckoning him to stand back up. You did marvelously as always, my dear Sanders. The weeds of corruption were found, and as always you and your fellow few have shown to be faithful and effective. Come, look at this. The bishop delicately took Sanders' hand and led him to the tapestry behind her. This was brought to us 2 days ago, from Melith of all places. Do you recognize it? Sanders looked up at the artistic marvel before him. The entire piece covered the chamber wall, easily stretching 20 feet high and 60 feet across. It looked as though it was meant to rest here, its dimensions fitting perfectly. A painting of oil upon thick weave, it depicted a man of solid light on one side, his hands stretching out to the other. A beautiful waterfall fell from his hands onto the night sky below. It is the story of the elder Star O'Day, my bishop. His tears, which fell into his hands, created his daughter, the sea star, Coriothus. The bishop smiled at Sanders as he marveled at the art. And why did he cry, Sanders? He shed his tears because he was alone in the monoverse. But I don't understand, Sanders turned to his bishop. Why did Melith have this to begin with? They haven't followed our beliefs in nearly 1200 years, my child. Not since the ancestor of their current king ordered us to give up our religious doctrine and to become witch hunters, if you believe the few existing records that exist. The woman held her arms out to the
few existing records that exist. If you believe the few records that exist, the few remaining records.
The woman held her arms out to the magnificence of the tapestry before them. This is a message from the king. He means for the East to join back into our fold. He means for us to be reborn as the religious beacon we once were.
I like that.
Sanders.
The few extant records remaining. I like that. Thank you. That is much better. Good suggestion. Thank you, Vast. Okay.
This is a message from the king. He means for the East to join back into our fold. He means for us to be reborn as the religious beacon we once were. Sanders' sense of unease was not noticed by the bishop as she continued to study Oday and Coriothus. From bishops and popes, to hunters and inquisitors, to judges and executioners. We have traveled far to reach this day, my love. We, like Oday, were alone. And we have cried, just like he did. And now, we have an ally. Sanders felt her fingers caressing his hand, before softly locking them between his own. The West has been good to us, Sanders. But lacking in conviction. We have not been able to stretch out our faith amongst the city-states. They don't believe the way they once did. Sanders turned to his beloved and took her hand with both of his own. The uncertainty he had for his last execution, the words she had just shared, all began to piece together in the man's mind. He placed a kiss on her lily-white fingers as he contemplated what he had set into motion, less than a week ago. My bishop, my dearest Sammet. Why did you have me kill the Tiet? Was he not found to be corrupt? Her free hand traced across the midnight skin of her executioner's face, and she examined the concern in his eyes. The diocesan bishop, Sammet Meleton, smiled upon the tapestry once more. I'm sure he will have been one way or another. I'm sure they all are.
Okay.
Chapter 4.
Okay.
A kiss goodbye and a father's farewell. Once.
Okay, so I think that's okay. I'm going to have to upload that again onto Royal Road because when I was reading through it, it was like, God, yeah, there's so many mistakes, but I corrected the majority of them before I started the stream. I think that is okay, at least as a starting point. So I'll move on to Chapter 4 and see how this goes, because I don't think I've reviewed this at all.
Once more, this time give it a good crack downwards with the hilt. The young boy stood side-on with Violet's rapier held outwards, the tip of which lay within a pillow of straw, which had been tied to his bedpost. With his tongue firmly between his lips in awkward concentration, he snapped down on the forewhip, leading to a sudden ripping sound as the coils tore through the loose fabric. Violet cheered with encouragement as Drax jumped up with joy, immediately stopping himself out of fear of accidentally putting one of their eyes out accidentally. He cautiously placed her full whip upon the bed and...
Fear of putting one of their eyes out accidentally. Fear of accidentally putting one of their eyes out. I'm going to take accidentally out at the end. Out of fear of accidentally putting one of their eyes out. That's fine. See, this is the stupid stuff I've missed.
He cautiously placed her foil whip upon the bed and resumed, as Violet looked to Harlow, laughing heartedly in the corner. The mage gave her a nod of thanks and took a turn at providing Drax with some entertainment, allowing her to take a seat for a moment or two. The poor boy needed some distraction, especially after the heavy questioning that took place the night before. They did gather a lot of information from the orphan boy of High Rise, but sadly as one answer was given, so would another handful of questions. She found herself impressed with how Feeney carried himself. She was sure he was furious, he must have been. His brother had been wrongfully killed, his family's name tarnished, all as part of a plot to destabilize the city he once took immense pride in protecting. Despite this, he obviously felt empathy for the boy. He didn't raise his voice and didn't show any lack of dissatisfaction from the several gaps in Drax's knowledge.
That's very kind, Vast. I appreciate it. Whether it's true or not, I'm not saying you're a liar, but I find it hard to take compliments. But no, I really do appreciate that. Oh, cheers, man. Thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like when you do your own stuff, you don't appreciate it as much as what someone external might. I guess, I don't know, like you see like a lot of people who like artists and stuff. I massively admire artists, and they'll say like, oh, this is like a really rough sketch, it's really crap, it needs to be reworked, and I'll look at it and be like, that's fucking amazing. So I suppose it's like sort of like a similar thing. Well, it's probably exactly the same thing, like you say, Vast. I'm sure if I read your stuff, I'd be saying exactly the same thing to you. Do you um I can't remember from last time we discussed, but do you have your stuff available to check out? Like, is it on Royal Roads or anything like that? Because I'd love to check it out.
Considering how easily frustrated Athene often got, she knew it can't have been easy for him. What they did know was solid enough, at least for now. The boy had been taken in with a few of his friends who had been living in squalor for as far as he could remember. They had been without homes, and lived in alleys and under bridges with adults who were nice enough to care for them. From how he described the men and women who led them to Shaltanan, it sounded as though they were most likely servants from his estate. Most likely to avoid any of his mage fellows being seen in public with the children Arkham had spat.
I'll definitely check that out. Actually, before I forget, let me quickly pull the link up and I'll get it saved. Bear with me just 1 second. Do. Oh, you've got quite a few here to delve into. Is a few of these what you've like just started shortly, like in like the past couple of months or whatever, or they're just like working titles? Let me. Still trying to get used to how to use this. Just started writing 2 months ago, most of shorts. Oh, awesome! Right, definitely look forward to reading this fast. How the hell do you follow? I tell you what, I've got the tab open. I will make sure to follow you before I go to bed once I'm finished streaming. But yeah, cheers for that. It's always good to read other people's work, definitely. Cool. Okay, so
They had brought the children to one of Shaltanan's teaching towers at the dead of night, obviously to avoid attention. Drax had mentioned that there were many others already housed in the chambers above.
Clearly to avoid attention. I suppose that's okay. What is going on with my mouse today?
Drax had mentioned that there were many others already housed in the chambers above. Each chamber had room for 10, and they were put into the 5th chamber. That meant around 50 children. Each of them appeared happy enough, and Drax had said he was treated well, being fed regularly, and kept amused by Shaltanan and his colleagues, who always appeared friendly enough. The children would be taken to one of the floors below daily, 5 or 6 at a time. Drax had been taken several times. Shaltanan said I was one of his best pupils. Drax beamed. He said I was the best at writing his stories. This was where things began to get murky. What stories did he ask you to write? Theniel asked, trying to keep a pleasant tone. The young orphan laughed as if it was a stupid question. I don't know, I was never awake when I wrote them down. It was at this point when Harlow pointed out the necklace that the boy had hidden under his shirt. Why don't you tell Violet about that beautiful amulet, Drax? Oh yes. After the second lesson with Mr. Shaltanan, I woke up in our dormitory with it on. Only the best pupils had them. He said that it was really important and that they had secured it with magic to make sure I never lost it. It was really important that I never took it off, as it would mean I wouldn't be able to come up with my stories anymore. Once Drax had fallen asleep, Arkham and Harlow tried their best to explain what this probably meant. Most likely, they had enchanted the amulet in a way that could cause deadly consequences if removed.
I'm not allowed to take it off. Spelling is awful today. Okay, spelling's awful, always awful, but hey ho.
It may have been set as a trap, killing everyone around the child who tried to remove it, possibly to cover up any evidence of Shaltanan's involvement, you see? Or it could have been preventing something terrible from happening to the child when they spun their magics, a safety harness of sorts. Arkham had pondered. We have no way of knowing, I'm afraid. Drax estimated that he had been in the tower for a month or so, only for one day to have woken up with all of the other children alone. Their tutors had left, and the doors leading further down into the lower chambers had been left unlocked and ajar. As they began to make their way down, Arkham and his fellows had worked their way up, and met them on the stairs. I thought it was something I had done, Drax had muttered nervously. Why would you think that? Violet spoke softly, trying not to upset the boy. The last story I wrote mustn't have been that good because Shaltanan didn't like the ending. He said that things can't end like that and that he needed to change it. Drax took a deep breath and stopped himself from getting too upset. He still let me keep my amulet though, so maybe he fixed it. They had let Drax go to bed after a long period of questioning. Violet, Theniel, and Arkham had already arrived later than expected that night, and the boy had become slightly more emotional as the night went on. Left to themselves, they had begun to theorize the meaning of it all. Arkham and his ward had spent a lot of time with the child on their journey to Ulvi Ulviat, and as such had more time to dwell on what they had discussed. I think they were using the children as vessels, Harlow commented. Vessels? Theniel struggled to comprehend his meaning. I think they were speaking to something through the children, that's why they can't remember their stories. Arkham nodded and continued. Spirits of the dead perhaps? This keepish magic is unknown to us. Even the language is problematic to understand, from what I have read, at least. It's very guttural, primitive yet complex in structure and rhythm. Harlow finished. Even if this theory was right, none of them knew what to make of it. Whatever it is they may have been talking to, what did it tell them? And how would it give them the power to march upon the West at such short notice? How could it lead to these so-called strategic capabilities that the Meletian king wished for Shaltanan to demonstrate? Theniel kissed her softly that morning, before leaving with Arkham for an audience with the new mayor. His lips felt different, and afterwards as his eyes locked onto her own, she sensed the reason as to why. He was examining the marbled blues that embraced her pupils. Every eyelash. Each crescent of daylight that broke through the curtains and rested upon her face. He's scared. The thought struck mild fear into her chest, and she examined him back. The oak browns of his eyes that perfectly matched the long hair which rested upon his cheek. The slight stubble which traced his jawline and lips. The rough fingers that slid across her neck as she tried to tease a smile from him. The purposeful stare of a man who was trying to memorize every inch of her, before he was to turn away. Theniel kissed her softly that morning, before leaving with Arkham for an She and Drax had both hung their heads out of the window to see them pace with intent down the soot-filled walkway from the night before. A group of alley dwellers could be seen looting what wasn't blackened and burnt from the murderous confrontation, while others puzzled over the twisted bodies of ash that hadn't blown apart in the early morning breeze. I'm glad I have had the chance to meet you both, Miss Violet, Drax whispered, almost to himself. It's always nice to make new friends. Violet looked to the sincerity on Drax's face and gave him a forced smile, looking back to her husband as he disappeared around the corner. You'll see him again soon, but for now you will have to make do with me as a sparring partner, she laughed.
Okay.
I don't know if my being here will be of benefit, Theniel whispered with mild annoyance. He had already seen several faces turn to him in passing, as they both sat in waiting. None were pleasant, and all clearly with disdain. What he hated most about the council
none were pleasant and all clearly with disdain. He'd already seen several faces turn to him as they passed. No. He'd already seen several faces turn to him in passing, as they both sat patiently.
None were pleasant, and all clearly with disdain. What he hated most about the council chambers was the silence. Even at a hushed volume, his best attempts hit off cold walls and echoed around him. You're a Tyat and I'm Meletian, neither of us are welcome here, my boy Arkham chuckled as he indiscreetly observed the obvious disliking that they were both receiving from those hastily walking by. It's a curious thing that you Veletians have adopted, although I see its benefits. If Meleth was as vigilant against corruption, I doubt we would have any politicians left to govern. In an attempt to amuse himself, the mage decided to engage one of the grade officials with a polite nod. The overly dramatic gasp in response from the old fart tickled Arkham greatly, leading him to slap his hands upon his lap with a chuckle. Marvelous, he hushed at Theniel, marvelous. The door to their right.
He keeps chuckling. He's always chuckling. The overly dramatic gasping response from the old fart tickled Arkham greatly, leading him to slap his hands upon his lap with joy. Marvelous, he hushed Nathaniel. Marvelous.
The door to their right opened to reveal a tall man with a mess of blonde hair, carefully shaven face, and kind eyes. He greeted them with the first smile Theniel had noticed since leaving his wife. Sorry to keep you waiting, gentlemen, please come in. Arkham leapt up with pleasant surprise at the man's demeanor and gave him a vigorous shake of the hand. Juriel had been mayor now for just over 3 weeks, and just like with Kellier, it looked as though the position agreed with him. The Fent family had always been well respected, as had the Teats until recently. However, Juriel and his kin had often shied away from the political life. The family name had its ties to the arts, and also some of the most intricately beautiful architecture the city had to display, including the mayoral estate itself. Theniel knew Juriel to an extent, through one of the Fent cousins who he had commanded on the city walls. They had met once or twice, and had exchanged formalities, but the families had never really sat in proximity to one another. How are you doing, Theniel? The young man asked with sincerity as he beckoned them both to sit in the comfortable oak study. I'm fine, Juriel, you know how it is. I know, but I do not agree with how these things go. Your family have my sympathies. Theniel had not felt such compassion from a stranger in weeks, even when mourning his brother, and it almost distracted him from their purpose. You know, if I could do something to reduce the disrespect thrown at your... I know, sir. And thank you. But that is not why we are here today. Theniel looked to his new friend beside him and readied an introduction. Juriel, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Arkham Dorian from High Rise. I had the pleasure of meeting him yesterday. You've probably guessed, Arkham, but this is Jeriel Fent, our mayor. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jock Dorian. Dorian smiled. Are you one of the mags up at the towers? I am indeed,
Mags.
Jeriel, sir, but please don't hold that against me. He laughed. Not at all, friend. I'm sure you may have received a not-so-pleasant welcome here today. I may have to extend my sympathies to you also.
Extent.
They're
Okay, so that's all okay so far. I do need to get another drink. So what I'll do in the meantime is I'll put on chapter 2, the audiobook, just because it's one of my favourite chapters that I've done. It's very quick though, it's a very short one, so I will not be long. Just put this on there. Pause this. And whack that on, and I'll be right back.
Chapter 2. Burning the Good and Carving the Bad. Rain slammed against stained windows as smoke waltzed around the oak and stone chamber. Murdoch IV exhaled with a mixture of heavy laughter and chested hacks as he blew another thick cloud onto his lap. He hunched meekly over an intricate vase which glowed softly, its white embers fighting from within. Whilst his frail thighs held around its base, he lazily glanced up to the patient court members around the table. 9 advisors sat silently, each with intricate yellow robes of silk, each hidden beneath black veils, and each trembling discreetly in their own way. The decision to look at their king or to look away was often an impossible one to make, and without a correct choice. Previous members of the court had unintentionally provoked the king's wrath for staring, and others had been punished for turning their cheek to him. Over time, those that remained had elected to stare at the veiled figure directly opposite them, as if sat at attention like soldiers. Murdoch enjoyed this greatly. There was once a time where choking on his Mormasani vase brought him slight embarrassment, but when the addiction began to grow and his court began to shrink, he gradually cared less. Once the veiled began to sit facing each other, attentive and statuesque, Murdoch began to relax somewhat. He felt alone, like a child in a room of dolls, bringing them to life when it pleased him. It pleased him in this moment, and as his head dipped for another lungful, he croaked, "No one going to ask me where I have sent our army." The two closest twitched under their Meletian valour. With a slight cock of the head, one attempted a response void of tone or inflection. "I am sure my king has good reason to send his arms out of the capital." The young male voice paused to assess the best choice of words. "However, there have been queries as to the intent from those outside of court." The man snapped his head back to attention, seeing a slight nod from the shrouded silhouette opposite. Smoke crept across the table once more, like a predator stalking candlelight. "I'm not surprised." Murdoch exhaled. His left hand slapped upon the oak gently as his heart began to drum once again. His eyelids fluttered, and he attempted to hide the rush he was experiencing. Within a matter of seconds, the adrenaline washed away, and his glazed eyes looked back to the audience. "My army has been ordered to the city-states, westward." The king fixed his eyes upon those sat before him, looking for a reaction, looking for a response to question. All but one remained lifeless and obedient. Furthest from him and on his left, a female hand had been gripping itself into a fist for the entire session. The grip had been so strong that the delicate hand was as white as bone. It did not shake, but Murdoch could not help but smirk as he saw that her nails had drew blood from their own palm. Several droplets showed themselves upon the table beneath her fist. Another voice attempted to bring the king back from his attentive stare. "Do you wish for us to communicate anything on your behalf, your majesty? To the lords and ladies, that is?" Murdoch was not quick enough to confirm which of the shapes spoke, but he was much too amused to care. "If any of them question their king's intentions, I want you to tell them what happened to the last one." Murdoch gently patted the vase whilst fixed upon the distant hand. He went slowly. A stronger, hollow knock of the vase echoed among the chambers. Painfully, stronger still, so much life. The next knock led her hand to twitch, wailing in his chest. Another, "I've never felt trembling, death, shaking, like it." As Murdoch's hand went for a final knock, the veiled woman let out a soul-churning wail. The chair flew from beneath her. Her bloody hand stretched to...
What's going on here? I've just come back and be alert to going mental. How are you doing? Oh, raid, thank you very much. Terrible Novelist is raiding with a party of 9. Awesome. Cover my flesh. Well, there's plenty of it. I'm on a diet at the moment. How are we doing? Oh, this is amazing. First ever raid. So, who have we got then? Let's have a look here. Okay, so we've got Bleeding Ink. Thank you. Good to see you. Sophia's Scribings. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, Vast recommended me. Oh, thank you, Vast. Massively appreciate it. Oh my God, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. I'm going to put some music on in the background as well. Let's have a look there. Well, thank you very much, everyone who's shown up. So I'm just going through what I've written so far. Oh, I do a little bit of my own music. Yeah, this isn't my own music here, but this is just stuff from like the royalty-free stuff that you can use for streaming and such. I can put some of it on in the background though. See what you think. Not this. I'm not this good. Let's have a look. I'll put some of this on in the background. Turn it down a bit. Yeah, so I'm just reviewing what I've already written, really. This might be a bit loud, so let me know if the music's a bit too loud, because I'm running this off a different... Yeah, there we go, that might be a bit better. Yeah, so I've written 7 chapters and an introduction. Vast was was nice enough to recommend Royal Road last time he was on, which I believe might have been Friday, Saturday. So I've what kind of stuff genre do you write? Assuming it's fantasy, unless you say otherwise. No, you're exactly right. It is fantasy. So a little bit of background. This is something that I've wanted to last time he was on. So this is something that I've been wanting to write for like 10 years, and I've always procrastinated. I've always talked myself out of going through with it and starting again. I think this must be like the 7th time, but this is going to be the one. I'm in a better place now, job wise, where I can actually finish work and I've got the energy to actually do it. So I thought I'd start streaming, because then there's witnesses, so I can't get away with procrastination, basically. But it is a fantasy. I've got a bit of a plan. I'll show you. I say a bit of a plan, but I've used like a Miro board to plan everything out. So I'll show you this. So I've got the sort of the continent. It's all built on one continent at the moment, which is sort of segregated from the rest of the world. No one's been able to venture from the continent, so I've got like the key areas that are going to be touched upon in the story, and then I've got the actual, because it ties in with the stars and such as well, so I've got like a plan of like how the world itself rotates around each star and where each book will kick in, because I've actually planned 4 books. I do want to try making a map. I definitely do. I've done something similar using Photoshop in the past, which I did really like, but I didn't do it for this. I did it for a D&D campaign that me and my friend were doing, because neither of us ever did D&D before, and we couldn't really find anyone who wanted to do it, so we did like a one-on-one D&D where I was like the dungeon master and she was playing her character. But yeah, I'll definitely try Incarnate. I'll look at that. Made Incarnate to make a map just for myself. Oh, okay. Okay, so by the way, just as a side note, posting the way you did it on Royal Road possibly dissuades readers from it in the first place. I suggest either posting daily 2k chapters with maybe the first chapter having 3 to 5k words if you want to keep your chapters girthy, or okay, if you want to post a bunch of chapters a day, I also suggest 1 to 1.5k words. That way, if I have posted your story, makes readers scared whether they will actually commit to your story. That's a very good point. I never thought of that. Thank you, Bleeding Ink. Their first impression is also an 85-page story with no reviews. So that also makes people a little reluctant. Totally get it. No, that's right. That makes complete sense. I'll definitely have a look at that. You might want to delete and post every other day. Okay, cool. I'm completely new to all of this, so yeah, any recommendations like that is definitely muchly appreciated. I've actually got some sticky notes here which I'm taking notes on as well, so yeah, thank you for that. Great. But yeah, so I've got the sort of the I've got the world building down. I've got like quite a lot here, like the basic of the basis of the religion, and then the sort of the character ties, which is really messy. But how each character sort of ties into one another. This is the characters. They're not primary characters only. There's some secondary characters, some that aren't even really mentioned at all. Maybe it's mentioned once or twice, but then will feed into the later books. And then I've got like the equivalent of the story of creation as well, like the timeline before the actual books kick in. So as you can probably tell, this is something that I've obsessed about for quite some time. So my aim is, while I'm doing the streaming is that I'm just going to write it from beginning to end. The first book, I'm going to write it from beginning to end. I'm not going to obsessively revise it or start again or anything like that. I'm not going to fall for that again. But yeah, that's where I currently am. And like I say, I'm on the 7th chapter, but I did want to come back because one of the things I noticed when Vast advised about Royal Road, I was reading through my chapters from chapter 3 onwards, and I noticed some really silly mistakes because I wasn't obsessing over revising. There should be a certain point really that I do a little bit of revision. So yeah, that's where I'm currently am today. I'm not going to be writing anything new today. I'm just going to be reading through what I've got so far, basically. I'm going to turn this music a bit further down. I don't know if it's too loud for you guys, but I'm going to skip that because that's just a raw recording. Okay, so where were we? Let's have a look here. Return to my snail paste editing. Have a good stream. Thank you very much, Bleeding Ink, and thank you for popping in as well. Greatly appreciated. All the best. Yeah, see you in a bit, Vast, no problem. Okay, so terrible novelist. I've had that problem myself, an epiphany not too long ago where I wondered why writing non-fiction, usually funny childhood stories, was so easy. While writing fiction is tough, it's because I know how the memoir story is going to end. Right, okay. So I figured once I know how a fictional story ends, I can better edit and direct it. Yeah, really good point. Possible mystery novel writer. So anyone who is in currently, what is it that people are writing at the moment? I'll definitely check you guys out. One of the great things about streaming is I've got a record of what's being discussed. Fantasy in the evening, fanfic in the morning. Oh, cool. What sort of fanfics do you do? I'm so fancy my pants have pants. If anyone's got links and stuff that they want to share on this as well, please do, because it'll make it easier for us after the stream to sort of go to everyone and check everyone out. I really don't mind you promoting what you've done on the chat. I'm going to weirdly written fantasy. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Bleeding Ink. And I will check you out. Thank you. I'm writing a Maze Runner fanfic for a Secret Santa event. It's my guilty pleasure, except I don't feel very guilty about it. You shouldn't feel guilty about it at all, no. Fanfic's one of those things that I've never experienced. It's not that I've never been interested in it. It's just not something that I've really sort of got stuck in with myself. Reading it, I mean, I don't think I'd be any good writing fanfic, but I wouldn't mind looking into fanfic really. Maze Runner, I haven't read the books, but I have seen at least one of the movies, and yeah, I can see it being a big place to sort of build upon, definitely. It's fun if you care about the fandom. Yeah, definitely. You can't just go in reading it somewhat half-assed if you're not that bothered about it. You've got to be sort of invested in it, don't you? No, that's cool. Yeah, don't ever feel guilty about the fanfic that you're doing. I don't think the books or the movies are like great, but you don't have to think something is great to love it. No, I know what you mean in a weird way. Yeah, it's like one of my favorite TV shows growing up. It's not something that I've watched in a long time, but I knew it was cheesy back then, was Farscape. It wasn't incredible budget from what I can tell watching it, but the world and what was going on and the actual story was, yeah, it was fantastic. And it's one of those things that you could probably refer to as a guilty pleasure in some ways, at least in my friends' circles, because none of them were interested in it. But no, I can imagine people getting massively involved in that as fanfic as well because it had so much to it. I'm gonna have this review out loud just so I know I'm not missing any stupid mistakes here. So bear
Their
with me.
tale was not the easiest to comprehend, especially for a mayor with less than a month of experience. However, Juriel sat in silence and listened to what they both had to say. There were moments where Theniel was expecting the blonde statue before him to stand and ask them to leave, to demand proof, or to accuse them flat out of lying. However, the mayor sat with a finger upon his chin, elbow resting upon his desk, and patiently listened. After bringing him up to speed, Arkham and Theniel paused and waited for the information to settle in Juriel's mind. The mayor brushed his fingers through his hair and pondered for a few seconds before surprising Theniel with his response. This makes sense, as strange as that may sound. Juriel pulled himself from his chair and began rooting through a collection of books and parchments atop a shelf beside them. Several days ago, some of your old friends in the Guard responded to several complaints relating to a shack in the central Dais.
See, this is why I read it out loud. Because this stuff I wouldn't pick up on normally if I'm just reading it to myself because it just sounds natural. Several days ago, some of your friends in the Guard responded to numerous complaints. I'll just do that for now. There'll probably be a nicer way of doing it, but numerous complaints relating to a shack in the central Dais. Da, 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 da.
Unsuccessful with his hunt in one pile, the mayor attacked another stack on the opposite end of the room. Some local residents in the alleys had been speaking of loud noises and foul smells. It was apparently so bad that it had reached beyond the dais and onto one of the freeways. The guards found a body, a woman, partially decomposed. They told me that it looked as though she had been bled and violently thrown around the attic like a rag doll. Once the men had finished vomiting and whispering to O'Day, they investigated the space she was found in. Juriel.
Okay, that's okay. Bit wordy, but okay. So you've seen the first season, yeah. So what I would say is that the first season it's enjoyable, but it gets so much better when you get into like I'd probably say towards the middle of the second season onwards, because that's when I think characters start to connect with each other a bit more. There's much more going on, and it starts to build up on the backstories of the characters a bit more as well. But yeah, if you get the chance to rewatch it, yeah, do it. It's definitely low budget. Maybe it's not the best writing in the world, script wise, but it's enjoyable. Good to see you back, Vast. Work meetings. Where are you currently based in the world, Vast? With you working at this moment, it's like yeah, it's on about Farscape. It's like 7:20 in the evening here in Leeds, UK. Just wondering where everyone's from. Oh wow, in Portland, but the office in Minnesota. Nice. Where's everyone else from? Really curious. I've got to say, I don't think I've had more than 2 people in a chat before, so that having that raid has just made my night, honestly.
Introduction. Communing with evil and drinking with friends.
The thing I like the most about... Oh, this is reading chapter. It's reading the intro chapter. Thing I like most about fan fiction is that I can wake up with an idea, write it during lunch, and then have feedback on it by nighttime. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's one of those things as well, isn't it? It's like with fan fiction, there's always going to be people such as yourself who really want to delve into the world that you're writing about in much more detail, or from like a certain aspect of it. So there's going to be audience there that is going to jump at the chance of reading it and giving it feedback, which sounds fantastic. Oh, you're from Sweden. Well, hello there in Sweden. That's great. And Terrible Novelist from the USA. Sophia's time zones is definitely different than yours. Yeah. I usually spend half the day waiting for the Americans to wake up and do writing streams. I'm just going to put some proper music on instead of my stuff. Okay. Yeah, well, Sophia, it's great. Like I said, someone from Eurostream, and the trouble that I have, I want to watch a lot more streams, but I do struggle with trying to find streams in my time zone. So yeah, it's great to hear that you're somewhere similar. It means I can jump in and check out your stuff as well, which I look forward to. Same with everyone here. I'll definitely try and um, delve in and get involved. Thing I like about fan fiction is finding fic better than the source material. That's a good point. Yeah, I know what you mean, Vast. Like a different flavor of writing as well. Like it might not always be better per se, but it might have a different twist to it as well. Oh, you don't currently stream, Sophia? Okay. Need a reliable Ethernet cable. I'm quite surprised that I can stream because our internet is terrible. It's really bad, but it actually seems to be working quite well with the streams. Um, to be honest, we don't really use it for anything more than like live streaming TV, things like that. To be honest, I like that I can find fanfics that explore all those moments that the authors couldn't spend time on due to pacing issues or post-canon stuff. You know, I'm definitely going to have to find my flavor of fanfic to read up on. I'm gonna have to have a look at that. I might check out and see if there's any Farscape. You guys might have turned us on to fanfic tonight, just to warn you. I get that the story had to end where it did, but give me someone's idea of what things were like after 6 months, etc. Yeah, trying to think of something that I like any sort of TV show that I quite like the idea of that for. Hmm. What would I pick if I was to pick a fanfic? Hmm. Wow, almost 1700 works for a Farscape. Babylon 5 fic, yeah. Has anyone, I'm just thinking, because something that I've really liked watching, but it annoys me because none of my friends have really heard of it before. I don't know how popular it is, but it was like an anime. It was called Ergo Proxy. I don't think they did much of it. There wasn't a great deal done, but yeah, it was interesting. That's what it was. It wasn't something that I proper loved, but it had moments in it that were really sort of thought-provoking, I found. I don't watch much anime either. It wasn't something that I picked up myself. It was an old friend's girlfriend who loved it, and then she had the DVDs, the discs that I watched through, and yeah, it was interesting. The longest is 200,000 words. Okay, I think I might have to check that out. Preferred serial experiments, Lane personally. I think I've heard of that. I might need to check that out. But yeah, I'm not like a massive anime fan. I haven't watched much anime, but yeah, I found that interesting. Anime from '99. Okay. I'll check it out. I mean, like I said, I'm not like a massive fan of anime, but there's been several things that I've watched that I've enjoyed. So yeah, definitely I'll check it out. I'm gonna have to write that down. I mean, the main anime that I have watched, which I really did like, was one that my brother got me into, Tokyo Ghoul. I did really like that. I'm getting loads of recommendations tonight. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, so where are we at here?
Juriel turned back around to face the two, with several books in hand. Another piece for your puzzle, perhaps? Arkham hesitated before retrieving the books from him. It sounds dreadful, my boy. But what makes you think? She was a witch. Juriel interjected. It doesn't take a Meletian eye to distinguish between a mage and a witch, not with what I could glean from her frantic scribbles anyway. There are a few notes in there also which appear to be addressed to her. Arkham took a single glance at one of the loose parchments and immediately froze. Theniel peered over to the note and read aloud. My most trusted, Lilith. Shaltanan's daughter. Arkham bowed his head in sorrow. That poor girl wasn't a witch. She wasn't even part of the towers, not even a student of magic. She probably didn't even comprehend what he was asking of her. Arkham placed the notes to the side and took a deep breath before continuing to study the books, whilst Juriel and Theniel spoke directly. Theniel, I'm going to need your help. But we're going to have issues. Theniel knew where he was heading. No one will listen to you if they know you are listening to a Tiet, he sighed. Not until it's possibly too late to act. Not until they are already a...
No one will listen to you if they know you're listening to a Tiet. No. Yeah, I was thinking heed or head. Yeah, yeah. No one will heed your words. No one will heed your words. I think that works okay. No one will heed your words if they know you're receiving guidance from a Tiet. It's okay for now. It's okay for now. Doesn't need to be perfect right now. It just needs to be devoid of mistakes and repetition.
Not until it's possibly too late to act. Not until they are already at our door. Arkham began to mumble aloud as he tried to make sense of the instructions given to Lilith. This isn't Keepish. Duvarnis. Duvarnis. Come dance. This is Shord. I can give you some direction before we both head back up north. We're meeting Violet and the others back at the cottage. Theniel ushered Juriel to the city map on the study wall to get started. Once we leave, you'll be able to get started.
Get started. There's so much repetition. Be able to begin. Get started. To begin. Right, okay. I'll figure that out later, possibly call it a precaution following our investigation on the body we found. Of the body we found. Drill or exercise or something to make sure we can ready ourselves against the Milesian threats. I'm sure they'll go for that.
The elder, come dance and come scream, Arkham's hands gripped onto the book before him like a vice as he turned to the two Valetians plotting in the corner. Gentlemen. The two continued, not hearing the mage's shaken voice. Feniel, my boy, Arkham's vocal cords pushed forward to a higher volume, catching his friend's attention. At that, they both turned to see Arkham's face hanging pale and horrified. Are you okay, Arkham? What's wrong? Do you need help, sir? Jiriel followed. I know what he has set in motion. The two young men saw the fear in the Milesian's eyes. They heard the dry croak in his throat as he spoke. What was once the pleasant face of an elderly man was now a drained expression of dread. This city is soon to receive a visit from the Elder King. Chapter 5. The Elder King. The three of them retraced.
Okay. I need to work on Chapter 4. I don't like Chapter 4 the way that it is. It's I struggle with dialogue-heavy pieces. It's constantly Arkham said this, Feniel said this, Jiriel asked this. I need to work on that. I might do that off stream though. For now, what I will go into is Chapter 5, which is somewhat the most problematic chapter because this is where everything kicks off. This is the invasion of Alviet. It's the rise of the Elder King, which is the giant titan which destroys the city, and there's a lot of changing perspectives. So it starts off with Violet. Best way to deal with Ced is not to do dialogue tags and replace it with a period and an action or something. Yeah, that makes sense, Sophie. Yeah, definitely. I think what I'm going to have to do, because I think it's Chapter 4. I think Chapter 4 is the biggest issue that I have with dialogue. But also Ced becomes invisible. Yeah. Readers don't really see it. I get that. That makes sense. Okay, so yeah, I think what I'm going to do over the week before I do my next stream is I'm going to have a sit down and I'm going to go through Chapter 4 specifically. You'll absolutely notice it if you replace it with excessive other dialogue tags. Right. Thank you for the suggestion. Really appreciate it. Nah, it's good thinking. But yeah, Chapter 5, I feel as though is too long. I don't know. I don't know what your guys' opinion is, but when I look at, like, say, I think what's the size of the introduction, words wise? Let's have a look. So introduction's like 1,800 words. Chapter 1, which I think is the second largest. Let's have a look. I don't mean it's like long generally. I think it's just long in comparison. So 4,800 words for Chapter 1. But then when you get to Chapter 5, this is where it's so much longer. And it is all action because it is during an invasion and there's a lot of pinnacle points that occur. But in comparison to the rest, it just seems a lot larger, at least to me anyway. I don't know whether I need to split it up into two, potentially. Uh, 7,000, yeah, 7,100. So it's just under twice as long as chapter 1. But nothing much really happens in chapter 1 other than building the world, introducing the protagonists, and setting the scene. Yeah. I think chapter 5 is my biggest concern. I'm gonna have a read through that. Yeah, okay. So if I go back to chapter 5. Right. I know it hasn't been that long since I've been for a break, but I'm drinking beer and I've already broken the seal. And I came back quickly when I saw the raid thing happen, so I'm going to quickly go for like a 5-minute break. And I'll be right back and I'll tackle chapter 5. But what I'll do in the meantime is I'll put the intro on, the audiobook intro. I say audiobook, it's not an audiobook, it's just the AI reading of the introduction. I'll turn it up a bit. Right, I'll be right back, guys. Thank you so much for your patience.
Introduction: Communing with Evil and Drinking with Friends. The cracks of the decrepit loft wept rainwater from above. Open veins of knotted wood left way for droplets to gently slap the floorboards below, occasionally allowing wetted taps to break through the reverberated moans of the forgotten shack's timber frames. Upon the heavily dusted boards of the attic knelt a young woman with porcelain features. Her pure white face grimaced in pain as a single tear fought free from her blackened eyes. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda, the zealot witch chanted through the night. It roughly translated to, the Elda, come dance and come scream, and was not a typical chant of evocation. It was a dare, a taunt aimed at something that all but a few knew even existed. The witch had taken heed of the warnings before she set off for the city. Her body would work differently when beckoning such a dark thing. Her wounds would not run dry, her joints would creak, her bones may soften, dry out, or even snap. What her mentors did not prepare her for, however, was the tricks that would play upon her senses. With bloodied wrists, her arms stretched out to the shadows that danced over the candlelights. They waltzed in time to the flickering flames, twitching spider webs and the rhythm of her words. Her long, matted hair teased the fire, just out of reach of the waxen wick. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda. Invisible fingers brushed her lips with each word, as if ready to pounce down her throat. The smell of dust and smoke mulled into a sweet odor of sickness and death. The machinations in her peripherals distracted her with faceless smiles in the darkness. Whispers in the butchered language would encourage her and taunt her back. Duvanis Dudento. Her arm flinched at the laceration that appeared in the air, dousing one of the candlesticks as her blood sizzled in the flame. It appeared like a ripwood in a piece of paper, and as her hands steadied themselves on the wooden boards below her, the hole tore larger. Slowly at first, as if something was struggling to peel back the boundary between this place and its own. As she pulled back to ready herself, the invisible fingers took one last grasp, this time missing her lips and glancing delicately upon her cheek. She was expecting the sight of hands grasping at the ever-growing rip in the darkness, demonic and clawed, but instead there was nothing but a scene behind it, something shining and fantastical. It appeared otherworldly, something from the stars, a pit in the night sky, devouring the worlds and stars around it like water into a drain. It was entrancing, but as the darkest point began to dilate, realization hit the witch. This wasn't a celestial vision, but an eye. A giant eye peering into the new hole in its cell and staring at the frail and bloodied body that created the window between them. Duvanis Dudento, she bravely exclaimed as the eye focused. The candles fought against the new rush of air that steadily blew from the other side. She tried to stand but failed as a large snap resonated through her body. She fell onto her side as bleached white bone burst from her thigh. She cried out as the pain almost blinded her vision. Elda, she panted as the loss of blood finally began to take hold. Her body collapsed, and she wrestled the chant out one final time as a desperate death rattle. Duvanis, Dudentot, da el Elda, the Elda, come dance and come scream. As her eyelids fell and her body became limp, the other side disappeared. A final burst of air forced the candles to lose their battle. The amused whispers rang through her ears once more in her last moments, and finally replied, Sheldiso da Elda, Shelvanus, Sheldentot. They have stirred, the Elda. They will dance, and they will scream.
I've no time for your fuckery, Samsol. The stout merchant belched up the dregs of his tankard as he snapped at his employee, who had clearly nursed her own drink. A third of her pint remained in her own cup. You'll drink that up now, or I'm having it. The merchant was a bald and stout man of the West. He let his hands fall from his aged face, which displayed the deep ridges one might have from a life of laughter, or more likely in Bellon's case, regular frowning through his furrowed brow. He dried his ale-damped beard with the sleeve of his oversized tunic and looked to his partner in crime. A younger lass from the shores, with a beautiful yet weathered face, Samsel hid her long black hair beneath a modest coif. She allowed her eyes to beam with a sense of enthusiasm, allowing the light to shine against the mild greens and dilated pupils. Come on, man. One more for the road. You've got to admit, it's lovely here. Samsel waved her cup in front of Bellon at an attempt to entice, before taking another pathetic sip. We've sold all your wares. You've made a killing. We deserve to enjoy ourselves before we leave. You've been enjoying yourself too much, you little shite. Bellon pretended not to be tempted, as he lazily brushed the cup away. Samsol chuckled. She knew it was only a matter of time before her boss would flag one of the staff for another round, and she cared little that this one would be hers to pay for. If we haven't reached the western shores by tomorrow morning, we'll get caught on a busy trail, and then we'll both get shafted for being late. Yeah, I get that. But we could set off in 2 hours? And we'd still be well on our way to being early. Samsol's bartering skills came in useful when she was working the stall, but even more so when she was working Bellon over for another drink. Bellon stroked his thick beard in contemplation, and at that point Samsol knew she had won. However, she was honest enough to sweeten the pot. Plus, you've paid for 3 rounds. I've only paid for 2. That's hardly fair on you. Bellon had already raised the attention of a bar hand before Samsol had even finished her pitch. If we get back late and I get an earful, I swear to God I'll throw you under the cart. After Samsol's first victory, it was much easier to talk Bellon into a 7th round, and even an 8th. It was at this point that Bellon got into the swing of things and pissedly discovered that this outdoor tavern had a house special, which of course they had to try. They call this the Moran Rattlers. Bellon had given up on the service of the tavern staff and had chosen to harass the barman directly for these drinks. They differed greatly from the foamy beer that the two had been quaffing up to this point. Instead of a hefty wooden tankard, these drinks were in slim yet tall cups made of hollowed-out horn. A thick, black, sugared spirit replaced the gold and bubbling beer. They both should have known better by the name alone. After all, its namesake, the Moran rattlus, was a well-known and deadly variant of snake, which could grow to a length of up to 15 feet and would tower over any man, woman or child that was unfortunate enough to stumble into the Moran Mountains. They both remarked that the sweet yet smoky concoctions went down a treat, but it didn't take long for the rattlers to bite. The rest of the session was a haze, and it wasn't until the fresh night air of the streets hit them that they were on their way home, somehow without forgetting the horse and cart. The two agreed after a few ill-conceived shortcuts, leading to dead ends and moments of navigational loss, that they were indeed going to arrive home much later than planned. In the black of night, and still within the city streets, Bellon began to formulate several plausible excuses. "You need to relax, Bellon. You're just pissed is all." "Pissed is an understatement, you twat. I'm nothing but Alco from base to bollock." Samsol couldn't help but chuckle at her partner in crime during his mild panic. "That was a lovely establishment, though," he sighed. They began to exchange complimentary remarks about the tavern and its beverages as they tried to find their way through the city's streets and its maze-like layout. The conversation died somewhat as they found themselves in a massive open square. The buildings around it were much more intricate and high-class in comparison to the cramped terraced homes that they had shambled through before. "This is the council square," Samsol exclaimed with relief. "We know where we are now. Look, that's the city chambers, and over there is the mayoral estate. That means..." As Samsol tried to reclaim her sense of direction, Bellon's eyes remained fixed upon the estate that his friend had pointed towards. He was sure he saw a glint of sorts upon the roof of the home, which was extravagant and covered in pale white stone and healthy trellised vines. As he was about to lose interest and turn back, another small flash appeared. As he looked closer and cautiously made his way towards the home, he saw a shadow moving slowly upon the tiles. "Samsol, we need to find someone on patrol." Samsol pulled herself away from her drunken planning and looked to the mayoral estate. Her eyes, which were sharper than her older counterparts, could see the shape with more clarity. White robes, metal boots, a barely visible mask. She grabbed her friend as he tried to step away for help. "What are you doing?" Bellon snapped in a panicked whisper. "Someone's breaking into the mayor's house." "That's not a thief, Bellon." Samsol was as pale as a drained corpse, even in the dark of night. "It's an executioner." Bellon stopped wrestling and looked back to the figure, which now stood tall outside a window that was slightly ajar. As he fought through the haze of the alcohol, his vision had eventually focused. He could see the white robes which swayed in the gentle breeze. The moonlight glanced off armored boots and gauntlets, and an expressionless mask of silver looked towards the two as they stared back in fear. "A copulous executioner?" Bellon struggled to ask without stuttering. Samsol turned to the cart and began leading the horse with haste. "We need to get out of here and let them do their thing. Come on, Bellon, let's go home," she demanded. Bellon couldn't help but to get one more glance before he followed in shock. But this time the figure had disappeared. Nothing remained other than the now fully opened window and its elegant red curtain, playing with the breeze.
Chapter 1, Mourning the Lost and Befriending the Odd. The elder star lit the cloudless morning skies above the capital. The city's stone embraced its glow whilst a shallow gust danced with crisp brown leaves upon the cobbles. A rare dry day allowed stall owners and travelling merchants to wave customers through the deep veins of Alviet with ease. Those with coin to spare would glide around those without.
Oh, right, I'm back. Whew. Sorry about that, guys. So, I was going to start with chapter 5. Change the screen back. I'm still getting used to doing the streaming. Okay, so this is where the invasion occurs. So I'm just going to have a listen through it and see if I've made any stupid mistakes.
The three of them retraced their steps through the dire alleys and emerged onto one of the main thoroughfares in the early morning light, just as they had planned. By midday, they reached the council chambers, where Drax couldn't help but be awed by the gleaming white marble that adorned the city square. Is that where Arkham and Mr. Theniel went this morning? Drax tugged on Violet's shawl as they strolled across the pristine cobbles, occasionally stepping on dry leaves that skittered across the pavement. That's right, Drax. They've gone to talk to the mayor, but don't worry, we'll be seeing them later. Drax took one more look to the tall spires of the chambers before turning to catch up with his friends. Harlow couldn't help but notice that his ward had been scratching at his neck throughout the morning. He had put it down to the possibility that the bed he had slept in may have been riddled with fleas or worse. The scratching had become worse, however, and his skin had grown red and raw.
Worse. Had grown more frantic.
He had put it down to the possibility that the bed he had slept in may have been riddled with fleas or worse. The scratching had grown more frantic, however, and his skin had grown red and raw. Are you okay,
Groan.
Harlow asked.
Scratching had grown more frantic, however, and his skin had become... That's fine for now. Don't need it to be fancy for now.
Are you okay, lad? Harlow asked as the boy struggled to keep pace, wrestling with the discomfort in his collarbone. I'm fine, he panted, just itchy. Violet, is your home a bit nicer than the place we stayed last night? It's a lovely little cottage just north of the gates, in the countryside. You'll love it, she laughed. I will see if we can get you a change of clothes when we get back too. Drax cheered as he wrestled his collar back over his neck. Violet expected the crowds to die down as they headed towards the north gate. A few hours had passed, and it was one of the quietest areas at the best of times. Nonetheless, as they got closer to the gate, small groups of travelers began to form into larger packs. It wasn't until they turned the corner onto the last stretch of road that they saw the worst of it. The long avenue leading to the gate was awash with a motionless crowd, and in the distance the gates were closed. It appeared that the crowd around them were just as unaware of the reason behind the congestion, and strangers began to interrogate each other for any ounce of clarity. She turned to Harlow and brought Drax in close. This isn't right. Harlow looked ahead and scanned the walls in the distance. Are there normally that many guards stationed, all the way up here? He was right. Violet had never seen so many positioned at any gate, never mind at this one. She felt unease in the pit of her stomach as she noticed that they all appeared to be looking outwards, bearing little mind to the crowd of commuters behind them. Harlow had apparently clocked this detail also, He placed his hand on Violet's back and attempted to talk over the crowd that had now begun to form behind them. "We should get off the street and get somewhere safe." The general took stock of his men as he made his way to the tent. The infantry was busy setting up pikes in front of their position. The archers had set their arrows into the ground and sat in wait. The battle choir were exhausted from the long march and were clearly parched from the constant chants that kept the men at pace for the past 2 days. The men were in no condition to take a city, but orders were orders, and Cuthbert did not intend to. They were in no condition to take a city, but orders were orders, and Cuthbert did not intend to incur the wrath of the Addict King's new pet. He thought Murdoch was ill with bloodlust, but the punishments that Shaltanan had inflicted upon those unable to keep pace was sadistic. The army's journey across Meleth and over the border left a trail of flayed soldiers behind in their wake. Deserters were rounded up and blinded, their hands and feet bound, and tied to the nearest tree to be consumed by the hostile wildlife that stalked the moors. Those who simply fell to their knees with exhaustion were never to stand again, their feet were severed, and they were left behind to crawl or die. Shaltanan was always surrounded by his knot of witches, callous and unpredictable. They would spend one night rotting with the troops and another chanting at shadows. They did not worry about attracting attention, they were under the king's protection. The entire island continent of Lathen was made up of 2 separate races, those born as children of spring, under the watchful eye of the season's herald Vazanta, and those born under the herald Borsha, the children of the monsoon. Witches were different. Children of Haymont and Pony, women born in the early frosts, or the depths of winter didn't always grow into witches, but only they had the capability to do so. Some blamed this on a curse from the 2 heralds themselves, those that believe in the copulus doctrine, at least. Up until the last 100 years, it was still deemed as appropriate to cast children of the winter and frost seasons into the sea, to be consumed by the Ratlas Leviathan. Either a precautionary measure, or an act committed in the hopes of appeasing the ocean beast. However, Meleth specifically had recently taken these children in, with the hopes of raising budding magi through preemptive reform. Whilst they did not have any unique abilities in the magic arts, they had a gift of coercing magic to their will with ease at an early age. It was their mental dispositions, however, that gave them a reputation of dread and unpredictability. Shaltanan's pupils, the official magi from the Learning Towers, kept the battle choirs in check. When the armored men of magic were not chanting, they were polishing their steel or lubricating their throats. Cuthbert has seen more than a couple remove their helmets to retch or spit up blood. Keeping pace with magic was typically used for a short day's march where needed, however these soldiers had been made to keep the men moving beyond that considerably. Despite the sympathy he felt for those men and women, he couldn't deny their effectiveness. What should have taken around 3 to 4 weeks, the soldiers had achieved in just over 2. This wasn't Shaltanan's plan originally, but apparently a Meletian had turned his back on the king and left for the west to warn Ulvi Ulviat. The mage knew the traitor would beat the army here, but he also knew that flogging the men to their limits would still allow at least some element of surprise. Before entering the tent, General Cuthbert gave one last glance to the beautiful city before them and thought of Lilith. She was dead, he knew as much. Sent forward to sacrifice herself for the greater good by her own father. It mattered to neither Shaltanan nor Lilith that she had disappeared from High Rise without a word, on a mission of knowledge and glory. It mattered not that they had both made a widower of him. I hope it was worth it, you stupid girl. He hoped that the tent would be devoid of the witches as he entered, but he was soon to be disappointed as he heard the
Helps if I don't put myself on mute. Better have been worth it, you stupid girl. He hoped that the tent would be devoid. Yeah, that should be okay. This music is a bit too lively. There we go.
He hoped that the tent would be devoid of the witches as he entered, but he was soon to be disappointed as he heard the wicked giggles and hushed tongues of the women that sat behind Shaltanan. He was overlooking a map of the city in earnest and did not react to Cuthbert's presence. If he were a mere soldier, he would be terrified to be in the presence of this brood, but the general knew he was not to be harmed by the king's orders, for now at least. Stakes are planted, and the men are in position, Cuthbert advised. Once the troops are rested somewhat, we will be ready at your command. Shaltanan's cold yet quiet response sliced through the witch's babble. What of the other gates? A legion is in position on both the west and north gates. The men in the north have situated themselves in between the city walls and the hamlets. Their presence chased a few civilians back into the city, and those separated from the gate have fled their homes and dispersed. It seems you were right. Despite arriving behind this traitor, they were still not expecting our appearance. They may have been expecting it, just not as promptly, Shaltanan sighed. My methods were harsh, but it has allowed us the opportunity to continue as planned. Cuthbert looked to the witches, one of which appeared to be whispering about him to the others. All their eyes remained transfixed on him, and he could not prevent himself from shuffling uncomfortably on the spot. How do you wish to proceed, sir? Your men will remain where you are. No one enters, or leaves, that city.
Your men will remain where they are, not you are.
Your men will remain where they are. No one enters, or leaves, that city. Sir? Your army is here for one reason, to keep them behind that wall, and simply standing at the ready in plain view will do just that. If they open the gates and attempt to confront you, you will chase them back in. If they open the gates and attempt to flee, you will cut them down and chase the stragglers back in. Do you understand? Cuthbert hesitated. Do we not mean to take the city, Shaltanan? We take nothing today. We have no need for Olviat. We are not here to conquer, we are here to eradicate. And that is my reason for being here. Once tonight is over, I will be leading the army to the next city, and you will be heading back to High Rise to report back to your king. You will tell him everything that you witnessed tonight. Do you understand me? General Cuthbert shook the unease free and stood to attention, and with a nod turned to take his leave. One more thing, General. Cuthbert turned back to face the mage, whose eyes looked as though they were attempting to burn holes into his own.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, terrible novelist. Enjoy the rest of work, and yeah, hopefully see you soon. And welcome back, Fast. Hope the dog walk was good.
General Cuthbert shook the unease free and stood to attention, and with a nod turned to take his leave. One more thing, General. Cuthbert turned back to face the mage, whose eyes looked as though they were attempting to burn holes into his own. Despite what you may think you have lost, know this. You never had my blessings, and you never would have. Whatever matrilineal bond you think you held with Lilith was not ordained by me. Therefore it was not ordained by King Murdoch IV. Therefore it will not be recognized under Meletian law. It did not happen. The general did his best to remain motionless.
Don't need another therefore. It will not be recognized under Meletian law. It did not happen.
The general did his best to remain motionless and without expression. I lost a daughter. You did not lose a wife. The two glared intently into each other's eyes, and Shaltanan smirked as he could see Cuthbert struggling to hold onto his composure. It wasn't until the devilish giggles from the witches caught Shaltanan's attention that they both broke their stares. "That is all, General." Panic and confusion gripped the group as they watched the approaching army and realized their hasty plan was for nothing. Arkham stood speechless on the southern walls as he gazed upon the yellow banners of his own country in the distance. "Many days until anything comes to pass," Theniel half laughed as he walked up and down the line of fencers and guards on the wall. "That's what you said, Arkham. We have many days before anything may come to pass." Jiriel tried to keep calm despite his shock. "This is no time to squabble." Theniel knew he was right and bit his tongue as he looked to the army in the distance, calculating their numbers. "We have the men to put up a fight, but I'm betting they have just as many at the other gates also. We can't hold the city when they march. Arkham, gather yourself," Theniel said, looking to the old man who still appeared dazed. The mage snapped out of his trance and blinked his...
Okay.
Theniel commanded, looking to the old man who still appeared dazed. The mage snapped out of his trance and blinked his fear away. Right. Sorry, my boy. They are not here to storm the city, Jiriel. But we will not be able to stop what is heading this way. We need to get as far away from here as we can. You want us to retreat? Theniel lost his patience. You came all this way to tell us to run? Are you mental? I did not know what I know now, Tyet. This weapon is too much for us, Arkham said urgently. Jiriel tried to bring them back to calm. Arkham. What is coming? He was using the children as vessels.
Arkham pleaded urgently. Okay.
He was using the children as vessels. But not to talk to spirits. The young girl, Lilith, she was brought here to create a beacon for the Elder King. This keepish magic has allowed him to commune with beings that we thought to be entirely theoretical, characters from religious scripture. Fairy tales. Arkham said, struggling to compose himself.
Arkham... Arkham stuttered, struggling to compose himself. Yeah, I suppose that works. Okay.
The Elder King is supposed to be one of O'Day's first creations. Before us, before the mountains or the sea, even. That is what Shaltanan's weapon is. He means to summon this thing upon us. And we are not going to be able to stop it. We don't even know what to expect. We need to get everyone out of this city, my boy. Arkham grabbed a hold of Theniel and pleaded. Jiriel's attention was taken by a guardsman who was...
I've used pleaded several times. Begged. Will do for now.
Jiriel's attention was taken by a guardsman who was marching up the steps behind them. Mayor Fent, sir. A group of strangers want to speak with you urgently. Strangers? Who are they? Jiriel asked. The soldier paused as he looked to the cloaked individuals climbing the stairs and turned back. 10 masked figures in white robes approached the mayor and bowed.
That caught me off guard.
The group removed his mask, revealing a young
Thank you very much, Queen. Appreciate it.
My name is Sanders, Mr. Fent. I am
How are you doing tonight?
To assist in any way we can.
Sorry, you might not be able to hear over the read aloud. Thank you very much, Queen. Hope you're doing well tonight or today, wherever you are. How's things going with you?
The soldier paused as he looked to the cloaked individuals climbing the stairs and turned back. 10 masked figures in white robes approached the mayor and bowed. The figure heading the group removed his mask, revealing a young dark-skinned face wrought with determination. "My name is Sanders, Mr. Fent. I and my sect wish to assist in any way we can." The northern...
Okay, so that section is okay. 7 AM in Australia, but I haven't slept yet. Wow, how come, Queen? Are you alright? Are you feeling okay? Sleepless night, or...? Yeah, has it been a sleepless night, or have you been hard at work doing something? Yeah, I know what you mean, Sophia. That's when I rely heavily on coffee. I don't drink coffee much, but when I do, I go to town. Ah, right, okay. How are you feeling though? Have you got work today or later today? You think you're gonna be okay for it?
The northern gate had become more manic with each passing hour. The guards above, oblivious to the peril at the other gates, had begun to muster their own plans. As they clumsily rushed amongst each other atop the wall, Violette's unease had reached its limit. The 3 of them had retreated to a nearby mill, which allowed them to overlook not only the walls, but the motionless army beyond.
Well, what's Orhau? Oh, well, that's good. At least you're not having to it's a writing relay marathon, kind of. Oh, okay, that sounds cool. This weekend on Twitch. Oh, I might have to check that out. That sounds awesome. Yeah, at least you don't have to be logged into some job and keeping yourself awake. Oh, thank you, Sophie. I'll check that link out. Thanks. I don't mind about links, honestly. If anyone at the moment wants to promote anything or suggest anything for me to read or to look at that they've done, please do feel free. I'm going to write down that note that you've just sent me that link, so I'll check it out after the stream. Okay.
They are about to do something foolish. She ushered the increasingly panicked Drax into Harlow's arms. "Violet, I'm a little out of my depth here," Harlow hushed to not scare their ward further. She observed as the guards began to equip themselves, small groups of which shambled down the steps leading to the gate. "We're still not safe up here. I think we should head back."
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree, Sophia. It's not something I'm going to have to worry about for a long time. But, yeah, I totally get it. I think I had a bot come through on a couple of days ago about promoting the stream. And it's like, yeah, that was a bit sketchy, but I think that's all I'm going to have to worry about right now as a small streamer. Okay, so I haven't made any stupid mistakes here so far, which is good. Although, again, this chapter is a bit lengthy, so I don't know whether there's anything that I need to take out. Okay.
Before either of them had chance to react, the heavy gates opened, and the crowd below began shouting and screaming in a chorus, as the Miletian army came into view. The natural instinct of those below took hold, with large groups pushing their way back into the streets. Others, less inclined to flee, were caught by the panic regardless, leading to bodies being either caught in the current or trampled beneath. Violet spied an alley below which was out of view from the commotion. She grabbed her companions who hastily made their way down and onto the empty path. The echoes of screams bounced along the stone walls that grew in height as they fled deeper into the shadows, leading Drax to whimper to himself as their steps slapped against the paving. As the crowd was slowly muffled by the sharp corners of the alley, another sound broke through from the tall city walls above. A horn, the thumping of heavy boots, and the immediate clashing of metal. The guards of the North Gate had hastily taken it upon themselves to meet the Miletians in battle. As the final moments of daylight once again began to break through the depths of the passage, the street ahead grew closer, and as such a new crowd of fear and mania could be heard. Occasional silhouettes were seen fleeing from right to left, some in a heavy sprint, some stumbling against the walls, and some on all fours. Harlow placed his hand against Violet and Drax, bringing them to a slower pace. They stopped at once, as a few bodies fell into the alley before them. The crowd outside had begun to find their way into the passage, and all Violet could think to do was to grab Drax and keep him against the wall. What was once 2 or 3 people turned into 10. The light began to slowly fade once more, with darkened bodies thrashing against each other as they grew closer. The first impact almost floored Harlow. The second did. His head was the first to slap against the floor, with the rest of his body following suit. With a quick glance to Violet and the boy, he quickly shielded himself from the cattle-like stomping which glanced upon his face and neck. Drax's scream was muffled by Violet's arm, which wrapped around his head desperately. The glance of a flailing hand slapped against her cheek as a shoulder followed up with an immediate blow to her torso. As she instantly lost balance, she cradled Drax in her arms as her feet were launched from the floor. She took the force of the fall with her back, allowing her to roll over Drax to then take the weight of the ensuing stampede. Her eyes caught flashes of her surroundings as the bodies flew over them. Drax's eyes opened wide, then clamped shut with intensity. Harlow's body twitching with each foothold upon his ribs and limbs. Shadows leaping overhead, and the Elder Star breaking its way through the open air above.
Okay. That seems alright. Welcome back, Vast. Without thinking... Her eyes caught flashes of the surroundings as the bodies flew over them. Drax's eyes opened wide, then clamped shut with intensity. Harlow's body twitching with each foothold upon his ribs and limbs. It's supposed to be a bit faster paced, this. I'm going to break it all up into sentences. Okay.
Without thinking, she attempted to position herself upright, Drax still embraced in one of her arms, as the other pushed her from the ground. With a boot to her spine, both hands instinctually grabbed the paving. Drax, no longer shielded by her limbs, broke free and scampered back up against the wall. His face remained in sight for a few seconds, but the crowd began to grow. With a blink, he was no longer visible, and Violet's heart stopped. She was no longer fearful of the chaos around her, and instead fought her.
No longer. It was no longer visible. Violet's heart stopped. She was not fearful of the chaos around her anymore. I don't like that.
With a blink, he was no longer visible, and Violet's heart stopped. She was not fearful of the chaos around her anymore, and instead fought her way upwards. On her feet, she spied his shaggy hair as it bobbed out of time, away from her and with the tide. She yelled for Harlow, but he had not appeared to find his way to the surface, and the screams and cries drowned out all attempts to reach him. "I need to save the boy." Hoping that Harlow would understand, she let the crowd consume her, and she began to push her way forward. There were no longer people to Violet. They were obstacles in her way. Against his own eagerness to defend the walls, Theniel took heed of not only Arkham's warnings, but that of his newfound allies. The Copulus executioners had left their southern sanctuary to aid the Veletians with an evacuation. He listened to Samson's matter-of-fact remarks about what was soon to happen with more than an ounce of anger. "This is not something to debate. The city will fall. You will either lead your people out of Olvi Olviat while it stands, or you will be buried beneath it." The executioners had already leapt gracefully from the walls and had spread themselves among the streets with coordinated ease. Their fearful reputation would command obedience, even in the insanity that was beginning to brew amongst the populace below. That left Theniel and the men of the wall with one objective: abandon the southern gate, move northward, and assist in pushing through to the Moran Mountains with the city in tow. The guards, led by Duriel, had grabbed what they needed and had already begun making their way into the thoroughfares. Theniel and Arkham made sure to usher the remaining troops downwards, before ensuring that the lack of a defense had not led the Miletians to approach. This is madness. He had never dreamt that his only real defense of the wall would lead to an immediate withdrawal. But as the Miletian army remained motionless, he knew there was some truth to Arkham's calculations. They weren't here to invade, they were here to bear witness to whatever it was that was coming. As if answering Theniel's ignorance, the ground shuddered. A single, instant thud reverberated through the entirety of the city, followed by what sounded like a deafening shatter of lightning. In the dire alleys to the west, Theniel caught glimpse of a violent plume of dust and smoke, as it shot into the air. Arkham bellowed to Theniel from atop the stairs. "It's begun, tie it." The old man began forcefully shoving the last men down to the streets as they stopped to view the now pure black cloud that vented from the distant buildings. "Get to the north. Run."
Don't need to keep saying his name, because it's from his perspective. Okay.
Theniel grabbed those being pushed by the mage and followed suit, maintaining their momentum. Now alone on the steps, they both grabbed onto one another as again a deafening thud rocked the foundations below them. With a catastrophic crack of stone, what was once a blackened cloud was illuminated by intense red flame. The buildings consumed by the light began to sink out of view, one by one. In an instant they darted downwards, following the guards. In a moment they were no longer proud Veletian fencers, they were just...
Don't need "in a moment" twice. They were no longer proud Veletian fencers, they were just like every other disorientated shadow in the setting star, lost, scared children of Olvi Olviat. Okay, that works.
They continued to push the guards forward. When the men and women before them fell, they picked them up and threw them forward once more. When they refused to stand, they were left behind.
Throw them ahead once more.
When they refused to stand, they were left behind. The ground grew from an occasional vault of movement to a consistent quake that had begun to grow larger still. They dare not speak,
That sentence doesn't even make sense. The tremors grew from an occasional vault of movement to a consistent quake that had begun to grow larger still. They dare not speak, dare not shout, that's present. They did not dare to speak, nor to shout. The men did not dare. Hopefully that's a bit better.
The men did not dare not to speak, nor to shout.
Come on, the men did not dare to speak.
The men did not dare to speak, nor to shout. They both knew it was useless to do so. The air around them was too loud to carry their voices. Cuthbert watched in horror as the faint light within the city's western districts began to grow. With each tremor in the distance, whole streets seemed to sink and almost...
Come on. This is the problem with each tremor.
With each tremor in the distance, whole streets seemed to sink and almost immediately fall like dominoes in a blanket of smoke and embers. His fellow troops also stood uneasy at the sight, looking to each other and Cuthbert for some reassurance that this was part of whatever plan Shaltanan had kept from them. Instead, the deathly silence surrounding them led their doubt to grow, and their confidence to waver. Cuthbert made way for the mage's tent, but before he could even take his third step, Shaltanan's personal knot of witches burst from its entrance, making way for their master. With a flick of his hand, the Magi outside followed behind his entourage, and they all began to form a line before the nervous infantrymen. They paid no heed to Cuthbert, or any of the other armored men and women, and took their places in what seemed to be a previously rehearsed formation, facing the city that was now in chaos. Shaltanan was the first to speak. With one hand beating upon his chest to keep tempo, his free hand stretched outwards towards the western district. Duvarnis, Dudentot, Duvarnis, Dudentot. His witches slowly followed suit, some electing to stamp their feet in time, allowing both arms to reach out in earnest. Some seemed frantic, almost pleading the words with desperation. Others appeared ecstatic, with wide smiles and hungry eyes. Cuthbert and his men slowly backed away from the group before them. Members of the battle choirs, those who had more training in magic than most, allowed their fear to hang upon their faces, and seemed to back away with even more haste. Cuthbert could tell that these soldiers, even with their training, had no recollection of the words or tempo being used by the group. What is this magic? He thought to himself. This was when Shaltanan's Magi began to join the chorus. Same tempo. Different words. Da elder, da elder, da elder, da elder. One of the witches took several large steps forward, now standing at the head of the group. She turned to Shaltanan and produced a dagger from her sleeve. As the chorus started to rise in volume, the words began to crawl upon Cuthbert's skin. He knew he wasn't alone in this sensation, as his fellow Miletians could be seen shaking as if naked in a deep winter. Some had dropped their weapons, others knelt to steady their weakening legs. With a glance to the lone witch, he felt her eyes devouring her surroundings. Taking in all of the faces before her and relishing in the fear plastered upon each one. Her glare stopped upon Cuthbert, and she smiled mid-chant. She raised the dagger to her throat and screamed. Dudentot! With the blade upon her neck, she ripped her hand sideways as a trail of velvet red gave chase, spraying into the air. Shaltanan spread his arms outwards, signaling the witches and Magi to pause. The blooded witch turned with difficulty, back to the hellish pit within the city. As she attempted to point the dagger back to the fire and smoke, she stumbled and fell to her knees. Shaltanan was immediately upon her, grabbing her body back to its feet. He grabbed her arm and helped it reach outwards. The army watched in fear, as both Shaltanan and the witch struggled to hold her body upright. With a silenced whisper into her ear, he allowed her to fall forward, rolling slightly down the gentle incline ahead of the front line. Shaltanan turned, his face now doused in the witch's blood. He looked past his knot, past his Magi, to the soldiers that stood in fear. Shalvarnis, Shaldentot, he laughed, throwing the dagger into the soil below. The witches screamed with dreadful glory as they fell to their knees to rejoice. Shaltanan, however, strode towards Cuthbert and stood beside him calmly. "This is what you are here for, boy. This is what you are here to witness." He grabbed
That's okay so far. Okay, it'll do.
He grabbed Cuthbert by the back of the head and pushed him forward, pointing him to the ever-growing fire in the cityscape ahead. Cuthbert watched with trembling eyes as darkness began to grow in the light. He gasped with his mouth agape as the smoke began to blow almost immediately in a different direction, making way for something in the depths. Shaltanan's vice-like grip tightened around his head as a distant rumbling charged outwards into a guttural, otherworldly, churning bellow. "O'Day! O'Day, save us," Cuthbert whispered in horror. Night had begun to crawl across the sky, blanketing the city in darkness and allowing a deathly chill to glance upon Drax's sweating brow. The current of the crowd had dropped him into Narrow Street, and the familiarity of the buildings around him both reassured
into a narrow street.
And the familiarity of the buildings around him both reassured and disorientated him. The thought crossed his mind to cry and panic, but he was unable to do so. The distant cries and occasional rubble sprinting past him had ensured that adrenaline remained pumping throughout his body and mind. He had tried to follow numerous groups as they appeared to run with purpose, but it wasn't long before he realized that they, just like himself, had no sense of direction. He had also attempted to grab the attention of several adults that appeared to be guards of some sort, with little to no success. The most he had gotten from those passing by was a confident "head north, boy." He knew as much already but couldn't navigate himself in any direction with confidence. Arkham and Harlow had always led the way, and he had simply followed. The regular tremors that resonated through the city would throw him from his stride, and in some cases knocked him to the floor. In some cases, it felt as though the ground would pull.
In some cases. It regularly felt as though the ground would pull itself from under him. Okay.
It regularly felt as though the ground would pull itself from under him, leading to brief sensations of weightlessness, before the stone would push itself back up, leading his legs to give way. All he knew was to steer away from the smoke and fire that was rising behind the buildings to his right. The sounds, the heat, and the smog that hit him from the distance regularly led him to stop dead in his tracks. What was starting to panic him further was that regardless how much he ran away from the impending doom, the closer it appeared to stalk behind him. It wasn't until he found himself back at the council chambers that he knew he had been traveling in the wrong direction. The Elder Star was now completely out of view, replaced by pinholes of light that quivered in the dead sky, and the aimless crowds were no longer in view. He sat on the steps of the chambers, trying to remember.
The crowds were no longer present. No. The Elder Star was now completely out of view, replaced by pinholes of light that quivered in the dead sky. The Elder Star was now completely... was now set. Because it's night time, the Elder Star is the sun, so yeah, that's fine.
The Elder Star was now set, replaced by pinholes of light that quivered in the dead sky, and the aimless crowds were no longer in view. He sat on the steps of the chambers, trying to remember what street he, Harlow, and Violet had traveled through earlier that day. It was then that the moment of silence was aggressively replaced with a rising growl. It started below him, blew around the air around him, and then focused upon the flaming rooftops in the distance. The growl churned into a growl.
What?
The growl shifted into a violent scream. Windows.
What did I even mean to type there? Rising growl. Oh, I think I've typed that, meaning for it to be that. The growl shifted into a violent scream. Yeah, okay. It is a relatable question, isn't it? What was I even trying to do there? I think that's what I meant. I've actually put both versions down. Okay.
It was then that the moment of silence was aggressively replaced with a rising growl. It started below him, blew around the air around him, and then focused upon the flaming rooftops in the distance. The growl shifted into a violent scream. Windows from the abandoned buildings around him shattered. The city chamber bells reverberated and echoed back the highest pitches back to the boy as he covered his ears and screamed. The scream came to a halt, and as
this whole paragraph's a mess. It started below. I don't need to put him. It started below, blew around the air around the air around him. It started below, blew through the air around him. It started below, blew through the air around him, and then focused upon the flaming rooftops in the distance. No. It was then that the moment of silence was aggressively replaced by a rising growl. It started below, shivered through the air around him. No. Bellowed through the air around him. Through the air around him, and then focused upon the flaming rooftops in the distance. The growl shifted into a violent scream. Windows from the abandoned buildings around him shattered. It was then that the moment of silence was aggressively replaced with a rising growl. It started below, bellowed through the air around him, and then focused upon the flaming rooftops in the distance. The growl shifted into a violent scream. Windows from the abandoned buildings surrounding the city square shattered. No. Windows from the abandoned buildings shattered. The city chamber bells reverberated and echoed back the highest pitches. The city chamber bells reverberated and echoed the highest pitches back to the boy as he covered his ears in pain. No. The city chamber bells reverberated and echoed the highest pitches back to the boy as he shielded his ears from the sharp pain. No, that's dreadful. That's dreadful. The city chamber bells reverberated and echoed the highest pitches back to the boy. As he shielded his ears. That'll do. That needs a lot of rework. I don't like that. I really don't like that.
The scream came to a halt, And as Drax fought to listen through the ringing in his ears, he began to hear something else. It began as a sort of skittering, like you might hear from a nest of insects. Tapping and buzzing from a swarm of flies perhaps. But then it grew. Closer still. The tapping grew to thumping. The buzzing morphed into manic creaks of splintering timber. He snapped back to the flames in the distance, which was when he saw the source. In the streets beyond the city square, silhouettes darted across rooftops and downwards onto the street. At first, Drax saw it as a swarm of branches or vines, flooding the city as if a forest was reclaiming the city around it. But then he saw it.
This whole section is dreadful. Vines flooding the city as if a forest was reclaiming the stone around it. The stone in its way. I'm gonna put this in a different colour so I know that I definitely need to revisit it, because I do not like how any of that is done.
At first, Drax saw it as a swarm of branches or vines, flooding the city as if a forest was reclaiming the stone in its way. But then he saw it for what it was. A swarm of creatures, with textures of wood and bone. They were clumsy, falling amongst each other. Their spines and limbs, just like dried-out wood, snapped and creaked under pressure. Some of them falling of the tallest of buildings, just to become immobile when hitting the floor.
Falling from the tallest of buildings, just to become immobile when hitting the floor, spitting shards across the streets.
They were getting closer. Drax threw himself up to his feet. He didn't know which way to go and was certain he could not outrun them even if he tried. It was then that he heard the shouting. To the left, on another side of the square, Drax spied the charging Velician fencers. Their foil whips in hand. Determination on their faces. The swarm turned to the battle cries and charged in unison. However, a group of wretched creatures broke away, heading directly to the child. He stood, petrified, unable to move. As they skittered and screeched at pace, all he could do was close his eyes. The thuds and creaks echoed around him, followed by an ungodly screech, and finally a crack. Drax opened his eyes once again.
As they skittered and screeched at pace, all he could do was close his eyes. The thuds and creaks echoed around him, followed by an ungodly... followed by a crack. And finally... finally an ungodly scream. I'm using scream too much. Shriek. I haven't used shriek. That'll do for now.
Drax opened his eyes once again to see Theniel, back to him, carving up the creatures before him. He fell back onto the step.
What was I doing when I wrote this?
Drax opened his eyes once again to see Theniel, with his back to him, carving up the creatures ahead. He fell back onto the step, only to be immediately dragged backwards. As he rolled onto his back, he caught a glimpse of other soldiers joining the fight.
Back. I think I was only working on like 20 words of vocabulary when I did this. Jesus. He fell onto the step behind him. Only to be immediately dragged backwards. I really did not do a good job with this chapter.
Drax opened his eyes once again to see Feniel, with his back to him, carving up the creatures ahead. He fell onto the step behind him, only to be immediately dragged further away from Feniel's attacks. As he rolled onto his side, he caught a glimpse of other soldiers joining the fight. Feniel and his fencers appeared to make short work of the beasts. Limbs and splinters flew through the air, leading some of the men to shield their eyes whilst continuing to slash. Come on, Violetians! Pierce and whip. Feniel boomed.
Yeah, you're right, Sophia.
Drax was now back on his feet and gave the fencers room. He looked for Arkham, but instead he found some of the troops ushering him even further back. As the small group of creatures before them began to break into pieces, Feniel turned to Drax and held him close. What are you doing here, lad? Where's Violet? Drax struggled to speak and could...
You don't want to see my first drafts. It's fine. Yeah, good point. No one else is going to see them. It's just us. Just us five. Reached my daily goal of 2,500 words now, though. 15k for... Okay. So that's me done for the day. Awesome. Congratulations, Sophia. I think I'm going to have to nip to the loo. I feel like I've been taking loads of breaks and I haven't even done a full 3 hours yet. What I'm thinking for streaming is I'm thinking of doing Friday nights and Sunday nights as a minimum. But I am hoping to do more than that. I think if I do any more than the Friday and Sunday nights, it's probably going to be just ad hoc when I can. Like I had a free evening this evening, so I thought I'd give it a go. But I'm going to have to nip to the loo. If you're done for the night, Sophia, this goes for anyone. Thank you very much for joining. If I don't see you leave as I nip to the loo because I'm busting. Oh yeah, definitely, Sophia. Thank you very much, and yeah, hopefully catch you another time. But yeah, everyone else, I will be right back. I'll be as quick as I can. Thank you. Still lurking. Thanks, Fast. Yeah, I'll be right back. Right, enough of that. So, I think I'm going to try and get up to where I've written up to so far, and then I think I'm going to call it there, because I've got a nice 6 a.m. start with work tomorrow, so so where did I get up to? Yeah, so I think some of them meant to shield their eyes while continuing to slash. Okay.
Come on, Violations. Pierce and whip. Theniel boomed in time with each lunge and slash. Drax was now back on his feet and gave the fencers room. He looked for Arkham, but instead he found some of the troops ushering him even further back. As the small group of creatures before them began to break into pieces, Theniel turned to Drax and held him close. "What are you doing here, lad? Where's Violet?" Drax struggled to speak and could only respond with broken sentences in between the pounding of his heart. "Crowd took me at the north gate," he panted. Theniel grabbed the boy by the shoulder and looked back to his group, who had clearly fought back the first wave with ease. "We're going back to the north. Everything is going to be fine. Violet and the Mags. We're going back to Violet and the Mags." Drax nodded in earnest as they turned back to the square. The fencers had already begun to move once again, with a handful waiting for Theniel's orders. "We're heading north, people. Lead the charge." Theniel and Drax moved back through the now empty square, kicking aside the dry, wooden piles of the slain monsters as they went. Theniel's men led the way, clearing the hordes with ease as they climbed over the rooftops and into the side streets around them.
As they climbed over the rooftops.
Another tremor sent a wave of stone and timber, crashing into the guards ahead. They flew sideways, slapping against discarded carts and crates. Theniel grabbed the boy and flung him backwards, as a building to their left began to creak and collapse. The Veletian threw himself over Drax as the brickwork crashed onto the floor around them. Drax heard several stones beat against Theniel as he screamed in pain. "Tyet! Are you with us?" Theniel clambered back to his feet, his head pounding and blooded. After a few seconds, he attempted to respond to the troops on the other side of the collapsed structure.
Don't need that comma.
"Keep going. We'll go around," he snarled, checking the wound with his fingers.
Yeah, okay.
He and Drax both looked upon the bleed upon his hand. "Don't worry, Drax. We're
Come on. He and Drax both looked at the bleed upon his hand. Nah, just go for blood.
Don't worry, Drax. We're getting out of this. We're both fucking getting out of this." For a moment, Drax was just as scared of Theniel as he was the creatures they had faced mere moments before. He had never seen the man show an ounce of rage, even when he first met him, blooded and beaten in the dire alleys. Both looked to the sky, feeling the air around them shift. The cold of the night sizzled into an almost unbearable heat. The tremors that had been constant now lulled almost into a slumber. Theniel once again placed himself in front of Drax, looking to the ever-growing smoke and flames amassing behind the rooftops. "We're out of time." He lifted the boy from his feet and began to sprint back the way they had come, this time avoiding the city square and finding an adjoining street to flee. Whilst Theniel charged ahead, Drax looked back at the shape rising above the city. Formless. A shadow 1 second. A mountain the next. The boy grasped his chest in pain as it grew eyes which began to gaze at the domain below it. He held onto the amulet around his throat as it hissed and sizzled upon his skin. Theniel turned into an avenue, but the figure remained above. The formless shape grew ahead. A neck. An arm. As its body began to grow, its eyes disappeared into the smoke above, making way for a torso. A leg. And another. Waiting for another ear-bleeding, ungodly sound, there was nothing other than the ever-rushing air around them. Drax's neck began to blister with the heat from the amulet, which led to Theniel shielding himself from the heat which now also scorched him. He stopped to check on the child, only to see him flailing in pain. Drax tried to desperately remove the chain around him but was unable to. Theniel joined him but was immediately scolded as he grasped onto the red-hot gold. What's happening? Drax? What's happening? Unable to scream, unable to shout, Drax raised a pointed finger to the giant now towering above the city. The man looked up and fell immediately beside Drax as he continued to struggle agony. It was now Theniel's turn.
Struggle agony? Struggle in agony. Unable to scream, unable to shout, Drax raised a pointed finger to the giant now towering above the city. The man looked up and fell immediately beside him as he continued to struggle in agony.
It was now Theniel's turn to freeze in fear, looking upon the impossible sight before him. The Elder King had clawed its way from the depths below. A giant of black rock and fire. Human in shape but towering into the sky. Theniel watched as it lowered its head downwards to look upon the city once again. The eyes of this being looked to be the size of planets and stars, and for a moment, its gaze stopped upon them both. A jaw begun to open, showing more flame and smoke, snaking from its new mouth like a demonic tongue. It appeared to be about to roar, however it was Drax who bellowed outwards towards the Elder King. Theniel snapped back to the boy whose eyes were as white-hot as the amulet around his neck.
Whose eyes?
To roar, however it was Drax who bellowed outwards towards the Elder King. Theniel snapped back to the boy whose eyes were as white-hot as the amulet around his neck. Just like the Elder King, his mouth was ajar and pouring smoke outwards. The boy stood, as the beast above remained motionless, and reached out towards it. Theniel could do nothing but watch as the Elder King's eyes faded to nothingness, Drax still roaring with chaotic fury and reaching out to the mountain above. Then, in unison, the monster raised his arm outwards at Drax, almost colliding with the buildings between them. The gust of air from its arm's sudden movement sent Theniel flying back to the mouth of the street. He grasped onto a post beside him and held tightly, petrified. He watched on as the boy faced off with the Elder King. Drax's roar continued until his lungs gave up, leading him to collapse to the floor in defeat. The Elder King, however, remained still, dead behind the eyes. It appeared statuesque, as though dead or lifeless. Theniel took the chance to crawl frantically back to the child. He shook him back to life and tried to pull him up to his feet. "We need to get out of here now, lad," Theniel struggled to whisper. Come on lad. Drax's eyes shot open, and he threw Theniel backwards with inhuman force. As his back flew upon the ground, the man rolled backwards and back onto his feet. His instincts took over as he unsheathed his...
Back. Drax's eyes shot open and he threw Theniel backwards with inhuman force. Has his spine... no. As his body flew upon the ground. Flew against the ground. The man rolled... Drax's eyes shot open and he threw Theniel away with inhuman force. As his body flew... His body slapped against the ground. The man rolled backwards and onto his feet.
His instincts took over as he unsheathed his full whip, only to immediately lower the sword and to place his arms out as an offering of peace. They both stood facing each other, Drax with his arms flexed as he looked to the Elder King. After glancing back towards Theniel, his confusion turned to anger. "What have you done to me?" the boy roared. "What did you do?" "Nothing, Drax. I didn't do anything. We need to leave. Come on." Drax turned away disinterested with Theniel's pleading and immediately ran down the street, taking a turning towards the Elder King. All the Venetian could think to do was to give chase and did so with foil in hand. The boy moved with immense...
Violation, not Venetian. He's not from Venice.
All the Venetian could think to do was to give chase and did so with foil in hand. The boy moved with immense speed, vaulting over rubble with ease. The distance between them grew. As Theniel followed around the twists and turns of the streets, Drax was already disappearing around the next. It wasn't until they made it to the desolate carnage of the Western District that Theniel began to pick up pace behind the boy.
Oh, come on, this is dreadful. Western District, that Theniel began. Yeah, okay.
They were now directly below the face of the dead king. And Theniel watched with confusion as Drax entered a nearby bell tower and begun to climb. He thought about turning back. He thought about Violet and Arkham. With a few seconds of hesitation, he cursed at himself and continued to the tower. He occasionally looked upwards to the staircase that spiraled to the church bells. He could see glimpses of Drax's hand upon the stair railings above, again appearing to climb with unfathomable speed. His heart nearly gave up on him, but he pushed on. Atop the tower, he had finally reached the young boy. His back was turned to Theniel, his sole attention given to the Titan husk above. Drax was yelling, but with no response from the Elder King. Theniel made his way cautiously towards Drax, still with his foil in hand. He didn't know what to expect, nor what to do. All he knew was that he needed to take Drax from this place. Even if this thing was dead, there was still the entire Miletian army to worry about. It wouldn't be long until they moved to invade with their full force. He edged closer still to the child, attempting once again to usher him away. "Drax. We don't have time for this. Let's get out of here." The child turned to Theniel with the blink of an eye. His amulet still white-hot, and his face fueled with dread and anger. With a menacing glance towards Theniel, the boy turned once again as the Titan began to churn and move. Its eyes lit up once again, but this time it was different. Its eyes, once cosmic and inhuman, had now morphed into almost human-like form. Red iris swirled around pupils which dilated to fix upon the boy. The Elder King adjusted its body once more to move in close, barely 20 feet from the open air of the bell tower. Theniel was once again immovable, his fear taking the best of him. As he watched in horror, the king seemed to laugh at the sight of them both. It raised an arm high above its head, and at that moment Drax turned back to Theniel. His face changed to panic. His eyes teary, snotty and whimpering. He reached to Theniel and screamed, "Don't let him take me, Mr. Tyett." At the sight of the boy's fear, Theniel dropped his sword and charged towards him. He ignored the rushing of air above as the king's fist fell towards them and saw only Drax. He saw the child close his eyes tight, his hands rising up to his face almost in slow motion. 2 more steps. Theniel reached out with a hand to the boy. 1 more step. He got ready to throw himself at Drax, ready to take the fall from the tower to shield him. Jump! He primed his falling leg to prepare to launch him forward. As his foot touched the floor, a shape glided into view from his left. He could see white robes, moonlight glancing off armored boots and gauntlets. An expressionless mask of silver looked towards the child as they cradled him in their arms and instantly flew from the rooftop. Theniel fell to his knees as he watched the copulous executioner glide to safety with the child, who looked back in horror at the sight of Mr. Tyatt, alone. Theniel looked towards the ever-growing fist, exhaled and bowed his head. Violet. Chapter 6.
Okay, yeah. The rest of it is okay. So chapter 6 is quite short. So once I've gone through chapter 6, I think I'm going to end it there. And then next time I stream, I can start from chapter 7 and continue on from where I left off, which is where we get to introduce Ariana, which is one of my favourite characters, even though I haven't written anything about her yet. Okay. I think I've corrected most of the stupid stuff.
Chapter 6. The Broken Heart and the Overhung Head. The previous night was a haze of panic and chaos. Violet shuddered uncontrollably in her sleep as flashes of the battle hit her repeatedly. She couldn't find the child and had elected to fall back to the northern gate, reuniting with a battered Harlow, and the remainder of the southern districts. She refused to leave Theniel behind at first, but Juriel and Arkham reassured her that he wasn't far behind. That, and the testimony of Theniel's comrades eased her somewhat, as they witnessed him with a boy, making his way north. Those who had made their way to the northern gate had no option but to push forward and attempt to break through the Miletian army beyond. There was good news, however, as the numbers positioned here lessened greatly compared to that of the south and west. Violet's hands tensed into fists as she was once again following the charge. Gripping the reins of her steed, she fought the air that pelted her eyes at full gallop. She relived the sight of the Veletian troops clashing with the Miletians in the distance. She watched again as Arkham and Harlow pelted the battle choirs with magic from afar. Streams of flames and lightning flew beneath the stars and collided with armor of black and yellow. She jolted violently in her sleep as she relived the blow that threw her from her horse. An elbow colliding with her jaw as she pulled herself upright. The steed behind clipping her side as it flew past her. She struggled to fight at first. Keeping balance was hard enough. It wasn't long before she found her foil whip to be almost useless against the battle choirs, who stood like titans of steel. She resorted to grabbing a mace from the muddied ground, caving her arm's weight into unseen faces that screamed beneath the iron helms before her. They fought through the line with moderate success and did their best to keep the gap open for those unable to fight, allowing them to retreat towards the distant forest. Both sides were frantic and understandably distracted. The hellish giant within the capital threw its limbs about the city, causing tremors that floored hundreds of soldiers at a time. The Miletians looked to be just as ready to retreat as those fleeing the capital, breaking away from the conflict only to be commanded back into the fray by those leading from behind. Her breathing quickened as she recalled the desperate sprint towards the forest and mountains in the distance. Her panting grew heavier in the night as the survivors began to disperse throughout the plains with little to no sense of direction. What was once a somewhat sensible formation turned into a free-for-all. Violet woke in a flash, her foil whip in hand and her heart pounding, as she glared at the soldier above her. "Sorry, Mrs. Diasai. Didn't mean to scare you," he pleaded, clearly panicked also as the tip of her foil reached for his neck. "The scouts are back. Juriel wants to update you." It took a while for her heart to slow, and a while longer for her to lower her weapon. She mouthed a breathless sorry at the guardsman as he backed away and turned to his fellow troops to pass on the new mayor's orders. She spied Juriel in the distance. He was doing his best to provide guidance to those around him, but clearly looked lost. Arkham stood by his side, possibly at an attempt to assist when the young mayor struggled to provide answers to the ever-growing group. She looked to Harlow, who was where she left him the night before. Battered and bruised, the young mage sat against a thick oak and stared off into the distance. He was fear-stricken last night, but Violet witnessed him bludgeon a man to death. It was obvious this was not sitting well with him, as he occasionally held his shaking hands up, to look upon them, with near disgust. The young Valetian woman limped her way towards the small crowd, who parted willingly at her arrival.
Woman, not women, woman.
Arkham was out of sight, until the final refugees made way to show him kneeling, holding a disheveled Drax in his arms. "You're safe, my boy. You're safe," the old man reassured as the boy wept into his chest. She glanced to Juriel, who beckoned her away from the crowd. He was now joined by one of the executioners that she had seen darting amongst the battle last night. She was unsure whose side they were on at first, but the deathly quick eliminations that they performed on countless Miletians put her mind at ease. She did not have the energy to support Drax at this moment, and as such elected to move around the group to avoid his attention. He was in good hands with Arkham, and "Have you found him?" She groaned, cradling a broken rib as it shot a sharp pain through her torso. Juriel, unable to respond himself, looked to the executioner to take the lead. The stranger removed his mask, and beneath was revealed to be a face wrought with sorrow. His eyes looked up to Violet, his head still bowed. "I was the one who rescued the child." He was atop a tower, about to be crushed by the damned king. Sanders croaked the final words as he knew what he must reveal next. "I could save only one." Violet fell to the floor before Sanders could even finish. She knew it in her heart, no one could survive the ensuing rampage within the walls of Ulvi Ulviat. They spent hours at the forest borders, watching as the Elder King grinded the city down to dust and flame. "I have sent my men to retrace my steps, in the hopes of finding his body. I doubt there will be much of a body to retrieve," she spat at the ground below her. "I agree, Lady Diasai. But I have sent them nonetheless." It wasn't just her heart, her whole body felt broken. Her eyes were wells of tears. Her mouth was dry and her jaw weak. Her fingers were numb, apart from the slight feeling of pins prodding their tips. She embraced the pain from the night before, as it was the only true sensation she could sense. Her legs wanted to buckle, allowing her frame to collapse onto the floor. But there was something else. Something beyond the approaching urge of defeat. Anger. Her hands began to clench. Her hollow heart began to drum. She glared at the city as her eyes went dry. Sanders turned to Juriel whilst attempting to remain respectful of Violet's loss. There is something
of Violet's loss. Yeah, sensation she could sense a little off. Yeah, completely agree. She embraced the pain from the night before, as it was the only true sensation. She embraced the pain from the night before, as it was the only true sensation. Yeah, I think you're right, Vast. Yeah, only true sensation available to her. the only true sensation to embrace. I'm going to put available to her for now. I think I need to look at that paragraph anyway. I think I need to work on that. I'm going to put that in, that entire bit in red, because I need to look at that. Thank you for the suggestion there, Vast. I think you're right with that.
Sanders turned to Jiriel whilst attempting to remain respectful of Violet's loss. There is something else we must discuss, I'm afraid. About the boy. Violet raised her head and wiped the tears from her cheek. Drax. What about him? The executioner looked to the child, still sobbing in Arkham's arms. He spent a moment planning his words carefully. I think he played an incredibly large part in what happened last night. Much larger than you may already realize. The three of them looked to the boy with growing concern. Much more so than he may know, himself. Well, I don't think you need to worry about making excuses this time, boss. The women examined their surroundings, taking in
Why do I keep saying women? Why do I keep doing that? Every time.
The woman examined their surroundings, taking in the countless refugees that continued to make their way beneath the woodland canopy. She could still see the open plains leading to what was the capital, through the wide timber trees that had hid the retreat. Although the Miletian army, and their ungodly behemoth, had made their way south in the early morning hours, it was clear that no one felt safe here.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. It was clear that no one felt safe here. Yeah, we can't head home.
We can't head home, Belen. No, yet at least.
Not yet.
She looked to her companion, who sat defeated on the damp soil.
I tell you what, I'm so glad I've done this tonight because there's so many stupid mistakes.
We can't head home, Belen. Not yet at least. She looked to her companion, who sat defeated on the damp soil. She was unsure if he was injured, hungover, or both. Samsel spent the entire morning waiting for an I told you so as, yet again, she had convinced him to enjoy a few drinks before the trek back to the western shore. If they set off when planned, they may have made it out. I'm sorry, she whispered in earnest. Belen looked up at her with a slightly confused, slightly annoyed grimace. Sorry about what? He groaned, sliding his heavy hand down his face. I shouldn't have suggested another drink. If we left when we said we would I was going to suggest we headed back to that last tavern. You know, the one with that black drink. The old man groaned as he climbed up to his feet and steadied himself against a nearby tree. Either way, we still would be where we are now. We're both as bad as each other, he smiled.
Both as bad as each other, he smiled.
Samsel fought back tears of relief and began to chuckle between her sharp breaths. I think it was called the Ash Prince. Inn. She sighed as they both turned to look upon the last of the escapees as they dripped into the forest. Aye, that was it. Such a shame, that was a lovely establishment. They both stood in silence, taking in the resting place of Olvi Olviat. Its buildings, streets, roads, and glory now rising into the air as powdered rock. The early morning elder star
powdered rock.
Powdered rock. The early morning elder star struggled to break through the brown clouds that escaped from the ground. The immense city walls were nothing more than minor mounds in the distance. The glory of the unofficial capital of the West was gone, replaced by cinder and ruin. Belen sheepishly turned to his friend and cleared his throat. You may need to fill me in with what exactly happened. It's all a little blurry. Chapter 7.
Okay. So, I think I've got rid of the stupid mistakes from chapter 3 to 6. I already did introduction to chapter 2. So I think I've got no excuse now but to push on. But I'm going to end it there for tonight because it's 9:30 here. And I need to get some food because I haven't eaten today. So next time I'm on, I will be continuing from chapter 7. I'll do a quick review of what I've written so far, but I think I've only done like a page and a half. I've done like 2 pages. So I'll do a quick review of the 2 pages and then I'll continue on. I might do a bit of a plan on the Miro board because that helped with chapter 5. So I might start off each chapter that way now and do a quick plan. Okay, cool, Vas. Well, it looks like it's worked out good time. And then, well, thank you so much. You stuck around for the entire stream. I mean, like it's been 3.5 hours, so thank you so much. Thank you for recommending me for the what you call it as well. People jumping in. So I've got a bit of a mind blank now. But yeah, hopefully catch you soon as well. The raid, that's it. Jesus, I'm still getting used to all of this. I'm going to check out your Royal Road stuff as well. So thank you for linking that. And yeah, hope to see you soon. Put that on. Great. Well, all the best, Vast. Have a great day / night.